Hello, friends. Welcome once again to the Merry Corncrakes podcast, the official podcast for the Corncrake magazine. If you have not heard of the Corncrake magazine, you have been missing out, my friends, because the Corncrake magazine is a wonderful publication which exists to promote and celebrate English literature, both past and present. It includes classic authors, it involves current authors, independent writers, filled with imagination, tradition, and a celebration of good writing. If you are interested in any of these things, which you should be if you watch this channel, I would recommend going over to the corncrakemag.com where you can get for free digital copies of all of the magazines thus far. Though there is something very special at the moment because just today, the Corncrake magazine has opened a shop on Etsy. On Etsy, you can buy there are two copies left from the printed edition, the very special printed edition of the Corncrake, which doesn't have a digital version. It was only produced to be printed for the Witten, the conference which Shieldings runs every year with many great speakers. And most of these have sold. There's only two copies left. You can buy one of them now for £10. That's £10. So go over to the Etsy shop. You can find it at Corncrake Mag. Buy those unique special collector's items, which one day will be, I'm sure they're going to be worth thousands. But even beyond the sell-on price, it's worth it just to have those great stories. Tonight, we are looking once again at St. George. And with me to do that, I have one of the best guests that I have had on this channel before. He is none other than Ferro. Hello, Ferro. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, I'm very well. Thank you very much.
That is good to hear.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to be back.
Oh, it's great to have you. And today we're going to be looking at St. George in art. And I think it's particularly appropriate because this year, because St. George's Day fell within Easter week, within Holy Week, the Church of England have moved the official feast to the 28th. So we're actually doing it on the day that St. George is meant to be liturgically celebrated. Are you still there, Ferro?
I think I was bowled over.
Hello?
And it wasn't terrible. The vicar made a mistake about where St. George was from, the ethnicity of St. George, but I will forgive that because it was actually not bad.
Your line is a little bit shaky, Ferro. It was cutting in and out there. Is there anything you can do to fix it?
I'll try my best.
Okay. Well, I believe you have a bit of as always, one of your brilliant kind of presentations. So I'm ready to jump straight into it when you are, my friend. While we're waiting for Ferro, I should highlight that there have been a couple of videos on the channel already to do with St. George. Last night, I did a stream on the St. George in Elizabethan England, looking at his treatment in that period. We've had a stream last week comparing St. George and Beowulf on the Pendragon Round Tables channel, which was excellent. I've also sung a hymn, a St. George hymn, which is not very well known, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more usage now that that a sung version is out there on the internet. So yes, there's plenty of material for you to check out if you want to celebrate St. George and learn more about this great heroic saint and figure, both in Christendom and for the English. Are you back now, Ferro?
I am. I've moved the router closer, so fingers crossed.
We'll just have to hope for the best.
Exactly.
Well,
people are trying to take down the St. George stream already. It's whoever they stopped the power in Spain and Portugal to put a strain on the electrics to then have a secondary effect of like knocking out my Wi-Fi. That's the real reason.
This is the real dragon of the 21st century.
Exactly. Okay, we should just go for it. Let's just go in. Okay. I will tell you the format that I've got for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I've arranged it thematically and structurally by style, and then also chronology. Now, I've had to put stuff into very rough groupings. Apologies. One thing to note is, because I've gone for style as the kind of key cluster, often the date ranges are actually quite wide and wild as well. So bear that in mind. But I think it's important to look at things as kind of through the kind of the lens of stylistic evolution, as opposed to being pedantic about chronology and location at the same time. Now, I'm going to rely on Nathan to basically fill in all of the subtext and complicated symbolic analysis / history, and I'm sure this is stuff you've covered off already. But we're going to kickstart with the Byzantines here. Obviously, where the origin of the story, some of the stories comes from. Now, I couldn't find anything related to St. George as, martyr during the Diocletian period, but it seems clear that within a couple of hundred years, he gets kind of like turned into something a little bit more than that, and then also stylistically attached to another saint as well. I can't quite remember the name of it. Maybe it's Saint Gregory, I'm going to say. Nathan, I'm turning to you, Nathan, if you if you know what it is, but maybe not.
It's Saint Theodore. You've got Saint Theodore here.
There we go.
Saint George, and I think Saint Theodore is also known as a dragon-slaying saint.
Well, there we go. And this is dated to 800. It's from St. Catherine's Monastery in Sinai, which is a very famous early monastery. And it's our first example of kind of Byzantine art. What is Byzantine art? I think that's a good question. I would define it as post-late Roman style. So if you think about the kind of late Romans, the West and the East splitting relatively like early on in the kind of Byzantine history, if that makes sense. Then I think it's kind of like post 700. I think it's after iconoclasm. So again, if you know anything about the Byzantine history, they get hit by the Arab expansions. Let's just politely put it like that. The Arab expansions pretty hard. But interestingly, artistically, there is a big wave of iconoclasm in the Byzantine world post those Muslim invasions. And the way that I think basically what it is, it's kind of like, oh, maybe we're idolizing things too much. Look at all of these pagans, they're coming in, they don't idolize God in the same kind of way. Maybe we need to do that. And I think, again, this is just from me doing a lot of research into kind of Byzantine culture and history. I think there is this big wave of trying to detach from the physical world. And so the artistic style that comes out after the Islamic invasions is this kind of classic Byzantine style that we see it even through tradition today, which is interesting in a couple of ways. It's not realist. So again, if you think about kind of illuminated texts of the Roman period, which again the Byzantines had access to through Constantinople, they're not looking to realism for their art. They're looking for stylization. They're not looking to perspective. There's a big flattening of everything, and actually a lot of modernism. Certainly the Bloomsbury Group and Roger Fry, they turn to the Byzantines as a prime example of the kind of abandonment of perspective. So what we can see here is we can see some of those things here. So you can see these kind of like stylized people. I mean, the proportions are obviously out, but I think you do have to remember that with these like this is also design. This is a diptych, 2 pieces of artwork meant to be presented together, but the format is very long and thin, and because of that, the artist has to I guess kind of like play with the features to fit everything in. If you were to have a proportionate man on a horse at this point, his head would be really small and you couldn't see who he is. And the head is super important because it kind of shows who the person is. So let's give him a big bobble head. That's part of the reason why. Or you can see the horse's head. This man's head is as large as a horse's head. Now think about that for a second. That's the kind of relative proportion. So it's a stylistic choice to fit things in. And you can see this in a lot of ivory work of the Byzantine period. And we've got these kind of 2 figures, and you can see St. George here slaying a kind of a worm-esque serpent. But I love the stylization in it. You can see there's definitely something of a kind of Byzantine fresco at the same time. And look at the kind of rocks on the ground here. The world has been transformed into this kind of tiny ball that St. George is on, with these very kind of daring, dashing lines just representing rocks and the land. But I think a really something nice to start off with. Now, one criticism I would say of the Byzantine style is its lack of innovation. And again, we're kind of moving on here to 110, and this is a sculptural carving of St. George. So again, interestingly, we've got this kind of worm-esque dragon, hence we are able to identify it, even though it's kind of knocked out. Now, there is a bit of sculpture going on in Byzantium. Again, it's such a long time period if you think of it, from whatever 1450 to 1450, almost 1,000 years of history. This is kind of like a hard stone carving. So again, I would say that the Byzantine best sculpture is actually in ivory carving, if you see what they do in that kind of space. But I couldn't find anything in that for St. George here. Similar format, but again, there's a kind of a purity and a simplification here. But also, you need to kind of respect the material. And sculptors talk a lot about this, where you need to reflect your design based on what you're sculpting in. So something like marble is very, very soft. So you're able to kind of have these kind of smooth lines. It's all about kind of fleshiness, etc. But think about something like a porphyry or a granite or a soapstone in this case. Much, much harder. And because of that, you're not able to have the same kind of level of detailing because you're having to work really hard to even make a mark on it. And so you have this even more stylized example here. I particularly love the kind of horse's body here, the kind of curve across here, and the legs jumping up. Yes, the eyes are a little bit derpy on the horse's face, but again, you can see this is almost like this scratched into the surface of the stone here.
I was just going to say something about those 2 that you've shown, is that they both have George and the horse over the dragon, which, symbolically, if we're thinking from a Christian point of view, it's victory over the forces of darkness, of Satan, death, and sin. But I'm sure we'll see in later artworks that this is the moment of victory, but often it's not that moment which is shown in the St. George and the Dragon story. So I think that's quite noticeable that this is the model that the Byzantines are emphasizing with George.
I think that's such a good point, because again, I want to give you an analogy here, and I'm a bit of a musician at the same time. And when I was younger, I was mystified about how can we make so many different bits of music with just 8 notes. And I think there's something similar here, where we're just looking at one little story, one motif. I mean, not even a story. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it becomes a story self-referentially almost, if that makes sense, that the story is added to it. But there is so much you're able to mine out just from that, in terms of what part of the story is it? Is it the moment of victory? Is it the build-up, etc.? And how different ages look at different parts of that as well. So let's keep on going, because I want to push through. We've got tons of stuff. Here we got a little bit of fresco here, and again, I thought this is really, really beautiful. This is actually in Russia in 110 AD. Now, fresco, for those who don't know, you're directly painting onto wet plaster. It's a very unique skill set because, it is probably the most unforgiving of all of the mediums that are out there. Maybe you would say like a marble sculpture would be quite unforgiving as well. But you're working against the clock. Every single stroke counts, and so because of that, fresco often has this very loose, fresh, and easygoing stylistic style. And again, like this is just so beautiful. I just want to bring a couple of things to your attention here. This is St. George. We've got the kind of, again, the worm-esque dragon. But note, here we go. We've had these little buds here. The first wings of the dragon coming through in about 1,100 here. St. George doesn't have his sword lancing it. We're just seeing him kind of trample the serpent. But again, look at the horse here and this kind of beautiful stylization, and also the kind of the horse, the dappling on the horse, and also these kind of crazy rock mountainside. These almost look like eyes, and you can see that the artist has had to kind of massively tone down the color palette. You know, this is a color palette based on three major notes, like a blue note, a yellow, and a red, and the red and the yellow and the red are very close together. It's kind of like, or maybe even an orange, which will be based off the red. So you've almost got this interesting contrasting color mix as part of it. But I thought this was really cool, very, very, very fresh. And again, each medium is going to bring its kind of own little emphasis and value to it. And here we've got another one here. This is another icon from Likharui. I think this is kind of like Russian adjacent. But interestingly, there's a whole load of icons which are embossed, or like I've forgotten the name of it, like a sort of beaten copper at the same time. And so you can see this little square here. Again, note the oversized head of George here. Again, we've got the point of victory. And again, the dragon here is evolving to have wings a little bit smaller. This is more like what we see in like a classic medieval style St. George. But I really like the format. Again, look, it's in a big square, so the artist is having to shrink everything down. The man becomes bigger than the horse. The horseback legs are smaller than the front legs as well. So again, this isn't about displaying reality. This is about making the piece fit for the space. This is like design work as much as it is storytelling at the same time. Particularly like the kind of, I'm pretty sure this is kind of like God's hand peeking out from above.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you sometimes get this in kind of the illuminations, but lovely bit of embossed work here, and there's some strong determination in St. George's face there. Okay, we're coming into 1130, and this is your kind of like quintessential Byzantine style. But interestingly, two things. We've got a different motif. So this is kind of like St. George by himself, Son's horse, Son's dragon. But again, like it's an emphasis on, I'm going to say like the kind of the look and the outfit, the hallmarks of the hero. So again, it's not necessarily about this kind of moment of courage and the action, but look at his beautiful, like this is all about Byzantine textiles, which is, I quite like it. Look at his lovely cloak with cloth of gold on it, or his inner vest with the kind of black and golden hexes. His heavily detailed scabbard, which he's turned around, showing off to us at the same time. This is the armament of a king, let alone a hero as well. Very, very beautiful. The actual piece itself is all about, again, kind of showing off these kind of sumptuous materials. And I think it does pretty well in terms of perspective and also proportion as well. This is the most proportionate St. George we've seen to date. And again, note the time period, 1130. This is before Kimberway and the first painting in Western Europe. You know, it shows that again at the kind of Byzantine style is actually relatively far developed before it ends up kind of being imported directly to Italy. Anything to say on this one before I move on?
I think you make a good point about how he appears almost like a king or a warrior, hero primarily here, and in the paintings we've seen before. And I think that's something that is a bit of a tension in the St. George story, or not necessarily a tension, but something which surfaces at certain points. Is he a martyr saint, or is he a kind of patriotic hero on the king's journey, as it were? And I think at different periods that comes through more strongly than the martyr saint aspect.
Yes, I think you're definitely right there. One other shout out is for the wonderful hair as well. If you see any late Roman sculpture, they often have these kind of Afro style. I think it's like Greek hair is like a little bit curly, so they're able to pull off these amazing throws. But again, it's interesting that it's being referenced almost 100 years later by the kind of Middle Byzantines, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go out into 1400 here, and I wanted to include. I've been trying to include not just paintings, but this is some beautiful enamel work. So enameling is a process where you sort of create these like little pools that you then melt glass directly into to create this wonderful effect. Now, again, what is this? What's the advantage of the medium? Well, you're able to get these amazing, beautiful colors that again are quite. One thing, just on colors, you still got to remember that at this time you were very limited in terms of color palette because during the Renaissance period they had much stronger trade networks. So again, the Byzantines are just working with local colors, your madders, all that kind of stuff. That will allow you to have like quite a small palette. So again, going into the world of glass, because it's different oxides, etc., which react. I mean, this is the most colorful piece in some ways, and I just love this ridiculously multicolored dragon here at the feet of St. George.
I think kind of interesting that the colors of the dragon they're so colorful, but it matches the color palette of George himself, which is a kind of interesting connection to draw out about the character of the two.
No, exactly. So again, maybe we're trying to be told something there. Again, we can kind of see that the hand of God in the corner, which I quite like. This is actually a Georgian piece, but obviously Georgians. I don't know. I presume that's that's named after the St. George. So I don't really know.
Yeah, he's a patron saint as well.
Yeah, there we go. I love the little side eye on the horse here as well. It's all about the details here. He's just sort of looking up, being like, "What are you doing there, buddy?" But a nice bit of design work again here, and the cloak is really magnificent. That's again, look how it's kind of been almost turned into this like weird little abstract painting in the background of the piece. Okay, this is moving on to 1457. So this is actually this is the Byzantines reacting to the Renaissance mode. So I personally would say that there are like three major waves of Byzantine, I'm going to call them just Western European for the time being, interactions. The first is the First Crusade. I think the First Crusade is one of the most important cultural moments for Western Europeans, like since the fall of the Roman Empire, just because that's where the the connections between Byzantine and the Western Romans massively get built up, and again, people see all of these kind of amazing artworks, etc., and get inspired. The Renaissance begins in the First Crusade, I believe. Then there's the fourth. The Fifth Crusade. I can't remember the worst crusade where they basically sack Constantinople. That's another huge moment where a lot of Greeks leave to go to the West for a better life, etc. And they train a lot of people as part of that. And then the fall of Constantinople itself in 1452 is the third moment. Interestingly, like there are still kind of pockets of resistance, and obviously the Greeks under Ottoman survive. But this is in some ways interesting because you've got, for example, the kind of classic Byzantine stylization of the rocks here, but the dragon itself and St. George is very Renaissance classical here. So again, we've lost the kind of brilliant kind of late Roman style to this kind of Roman parade armor, almost like you would see in a Renaissance painting. And again, the dragon very much looks more like an actual dragon as opposed to kind of the super stylized versions. And again, there's an emphasis on action and these kind of dynamic poses. So it's funny seeing kind of like the Byzantine style kind of flow back at the same time. I was particularly enamored by this little piece here. Again, I'm trying to get some other non-painting pieces here, and we've got a St. George made out of tessera, which is really cool, in 1500. Again, meant to be in Greece, but I thought the quality of this was phenomenal. Oh yeah, one thing I don't know if you've been noticing, but St. George's steed has a knot in the tail. Again, there is a history of braiding horses' tails and ornamenting them, but I thought the knot was very interesting. And again, maybe talking about the kind of symbology between George and the dragon, the knotted tail of the dragon. What we're seeing here is, again, because it's quite late, I think you've got, again, elements of the Renaissance here. This wonderful horse with its mouth shouting out, rearing up. St. George here with a very stern face, and again, beautifully done. I mean, the cloak itself is magnificent. And again, I just love this dragon, which is almost like a cockatrice or something like that. It's kind of chicken-feeted with big webbed wings. Very, very interesting piece. But then look at the little tessera decoration in the ends of the wing and the graduations here. This is such like a beautiful mosaic masterpiece. I found it in the Louvre gallery, but I can't find much more about the artist at all. But I think this is phenomenal work here in the Byzantine style.
It is really special, yeah. I think this is fantastic.
Okay, so, but interestingly, this is kind of like at the time of Raphael, and the Byzantines are still kind of churning out similar work again, kind of showing their, focus on tradition, basically. And I just thought I'd throw this last one in here for a little bit of a laugh, which was Ethiopian style. And this is in 1700, but the Ethiopian's interesting because it's very heavily Byzantine focused from an iconography perspective, and like obviously whoever started off their traditions learnt from the Byzantines. In my opinion, it's obvious looking through. But also I do like the Ethiopians just put everyone as like black. There's no attempt to say, oh, actually St. George was a Cappadocian Greek, so we're going to do him as white. Jesus is black, God is black, St. George is black. And I think again, that's in my view, one of the beauties of Christianity is it's the internal interpretation of every single culture and people seeing themselves in the culture. So I thought this was kind of quite fun and interesting, and I like the Ethiopian style. I think it's very very fun. Okay, that's the first round. We've got like eight more.
Fantastic. Okay. Bring it on.
Okay, number 2. We're going to go straight into the Gothic now, and let me just bring this up. So
while you're doing that, one thing I'll just say is that one thing that struck me in the Byzantine is there's very little place for the princess. It's all George and the dragon, apart from one of those images that you've shown. So I'll be very interested to see if that's the same in the Gothic.
That's a great shout already. like I wouldn't say that the Byzantines are like that misogynistic, artistically or culturally. Certainly not in the same way that the Romans are. I think the Romans are much stricter in their depictions of women. But you're right. I think when it certainly comes to kind of iconography and saints, I can't even think of that many versions of Mary. Even for example, there's even though Mary was meant to be the patron saint of Constantinople, I think. Interestingly, anyway, I've shared the presenting again. If you could boot it up. Okay, so I mentioned about the kind of cross-fertilization of ideas and teaching from the Byzantines across to the West. Like one group is through illumination and like manuscript keeping, and of course from like, again, this is really post First Crusade. That's when our kind of manuscript writing gets kicked off. But I think people are still like Western Europeans don't really find their voice for a couple of hundred years. Really, they're still kind of very much in the shadow of the Byzantines, doing either inferior works or kind of slavishly following them. But by about the 13th century, I would say that they're starting to kind of generate their own forms. There's a lot of internal confidence and new styles at the same time. And I wanted to kickstart with this beautiful illumination here from Verona. And yes, here's a couple of things. I mean, we've got St. George. He's on a horse, the moment of victory again. But we've got St. George as very much a Western knight. And you can see kind of his shield here, the use of the kind of heraldry, and which again is a kind of key part of the medieval knightly world. But we mentioned where was the princess in this? Finally, the princess has turned up here, and of course she's holding on to the dragon here. So first time, and the dragon itself has turned into what we can have really recognize as like a Western style dragon. Although note the 2 feet. Dragons have 2 feet. This is my big thing. That Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual has done more wrong to historical ideas of mythological creatures than anything happened. Because whenever you say, "Oh, a dragon has 2 feet," they say, "Oh no, that's a wyvern." You know, that's in D&D always differentiated the two. But if you look at the original sources about what a dragon was, they've always got 2 feet. Although it does turn into 4, as you'll see pretty soon after. Just one note for where it's created. You know, Verona gets often overlooked in terms of its place of importance because they basically kind of collapse as a city-state by the time of Renaissance, and so don't get the same kind of recognition as the Florentines or the Romans. But they're basically one of the 3 most important places for art during this time period. So that's interesting. Just one last thing I'm going to say about that before we carry on, and that is Gothic. What am I counting as Gothic? What it is? I mean, this is probably the loosest example, loosest category. But I'm basically saying anything from really what strictly should be called the Romanesque up to High Gothic. I'm bundling together for the sake of my insanity in this. Do you want to have a pop at defining Gothic art in a without using Ruskin here? You're not allowed to use any.
Oh no, that was going to be my go-to, but I'm going to butcher it now. But I would say that it allows for imperfection, for the embrace of imagination, lots of emphasis on the notion of growth, and reflecting the good and the bad. That's what I'm going to say as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. Ruskin basically always thought that it was as much intellectually as it was stylistically, and I think that's important to recognize with the Gothic, that the Gothic mind thinks in a different way, and it also tries to paint in a different way, tries to realize reality. Well, if we're talking about technical details, I would say that Gothic is typically more real than Byzantine. It is also, I would say, I think it's more real than Renaissance works, because the Renaissance is about idealism, about the ideal forms, and that's what the true. If you want to go back to your Spengler again, the the maths emblem of the classical age is the whole number. It's the ideal perfect form.
Yeah.
While the Gothic is kind of like it's real to a point of grotesqueness, if that makes sense. You know, like especially the Germans will put some of the most ugly people you've ever seen in a painting, but you just know that those people existed. While you know Raphael and some of the others, you know, they're the most. Raphael, he always said that he always tried to like composite people out of the best features that he saw. He would take the lips of one woman and the eyes of another, and I think that's really interesting in terms of the mindset. So Gothic is actually, I think people do it down and say, oh, it's not realism. It's not realism. It is realism. It's like hyper realism, while Renaissance is idealism. Anyway, let's get cracking. This was pretty cool. Here's our first kind of decent bit of sculpture, and this is from a very famous rood screen from the Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Bold here, done in 1390, and this is one piece from it. This is actually from the cast gallery in the V&A. You've got to see the whole rood screen. The reason why I focused in on the statue is because it's so big. It's almost like an overload of stuff going on. So I just wanted to focus on this figure because it's totally brilliant. Now, we've actually seen... Okay, there's a couple of things. The space this is in is very tall and thin. So again, there's a bit of design work in the fact that the artist has had to say, look, I've only got this much space to put stuff in. What am I going to do? I'm going to drop the horse. You know, George has lost his horse now. You can see also but he's sort of kept the kind of the dynamism of it. One thing I would say is that Gothic is not that dynamic, really, in the same way that a classical work is all about kind of flexing muscles and these kind of beautiful elongated figures. The Gothic figure is always, it has an energy, but it's an energy of resilience and fortitude, of like a passive will, is how I describe it. So the figure almost, this isn't a dynamic pose. Look, his legs are kind of like quite straight on. His arm is up, but there's kind of like a stillness to it at the same time. It's like it's the strength of the rock. But the actual figure itself is beautifully rendered. Like, look at the detailing in the face here and the actual chest. I mean, you got to be worried for any man with a waistline as thin as that. But again, it's a stylistic choice for the space, and also he's made the top bigger so you can focus in on the head. Now, one thing you have to mention for the Gothic is what Ruskin called the deranged imagination. It's one of my favorite Ruskin sayings here, and I love how that the dragon has been turned from this fearsome yet passive creature to this almost kind of sadistic swine creeping up. Like the smile on this dragon is just so sick. Basically, I just think it's just so brilliant, and it's been contextualized for the time as well. Again, so we've had this complete abandonment of attempting to show St. George as like a historical figure. He's now entered contemporary, contemporary, design. So. Really like this piece. Okay, we've got another illumination here. This was from a book of hours. This is 1415, so we've moved on quite a lot. I love this just because of the most ridiculous dragon we're going to see the entire night here.
Yeah.
Little pet dragon here in St. George. I mean, I would say that this is not strictly heroic in the classic sense here, but the figure is very, very beautiful. And again, I just love the background here. You can still feel that Byzantine influence with these kind of stylized rocks. But look at the night sky. It's been turned into a pattern, you know, where it's been kind of regularized and the stars have been unified. But then also look at the changefulness in each of them, and it's not quite a pattern as well. Do you know what I'm saying? There's rough lines, but there's the human touch here. This is the changefulness of the Gothic imagination. Here's another interesting piece. This is this didn't have a maker to it, but I think oh, you know what? This is an English piece. That's why I included it. But also, it's out of alabaster. Now, again, alabaster works are very famous in the Gothic period, especially in England. And again, like people forget that we had a very strong artistic community in England and sorry, I should say, and Britain as well. In the pre-Reformation period, and this is just such a beautiful piece of sculpture. Now, what's interesting about alabaster works is that a very specific format, which is like a large rectangle, and it's got depth to it, but it's not that depth. It's not that deep. It's about 3 or 4 inches deep. It's in some ways it's kind of like a light relief, if that makes sense. So you've got all of this kind of relief work, but also there's a tendency to kind of shrink and enlarge figures to put greater emphasis on them. So you can see the princess is back in here. She's on the left-hand side, but she's obviously lost her head. Again, alabaster is very, very frail. And note that this has been painted on top of. So the artist has used alabaster in certain places where the horse, etc. But then this beautiful stylistic dragon down here, which is totally gorgeous, the lovely red, is wrapped himself in agony round the world and also round the leg of St. George. I think this is just such a powerful, beautiful piece here.
I may have missed it, but do you know where this would have been? Would this have been in a church or in a different building?
Now, that's a really good question. I've seen some reconstructions as part of altarpieces. So you'd have your altar at the front, and then like 5 or 6 of them get slotted in at the front. I've seen them also being rebaited into the wall as well in some cathedrals. But it's hard to tell because I think there's like only 1 or 2 churches that have these still in situ. They got hit hard by the Reformation, sadly, because alabaster is very easy to destroy. I think time also probably had something to do with that. But I think it's a really interesting format again because it's a rectangle. You're having to work in that space, and that's why the kind of princesses gets shrunk down relatively, but really interesting. Speaking of English subjects, we've got another one here. This is into 1450 now. So again, 1450, you got to think that the Renaissance is in like full swing, really by now, in like mainly in Italy, Florence, etc. But in the north, we just carry on what we're doing basically, but we just refine it further. And this is again part of a rood screen in Ranworth Church. I think it's in Norwich. Oh yeah, Norfolk. There we go. This is in tempera, and I think it's a really beautiful piece. Now, what's interesting about egg tempera is that it's a very vibrant medium. If you've ever seen tempera paintings, they really pop color-wise because like the base just makes the pigments a little bit brighter, and also you can kind of layer on pigment on pigment. It's it's been described as a kind of a transparent medium at the same time, allowing you to do these kind of like glazes, etc., very, very easily. But I think, again, this is a really interesting piece. We've got the kind of large rectangle here for the rood screen piece. St. George standing over. Again, the horse has been removed because the emphasis is on the figure. Look, the whole figure takes up the space. But again, look at all of the detail here. Like, I think detail is, again, another word that you want to use when talking about Gothic work. Emphasis on clothes and the armor and the fabrics as well. Like, if you look at the background, this is taken from a Lucci's brocade, I'm almost certain. So they've copied the design and then put it as a painting because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to paint than it is to make some of these fabrics at this time, basically, funnily enough. But I really love the kind of serenity, and again, it's abundant, it's over the top, it's exaggerant, it's excessive, but it's got this anti-dynamism to it that I keep talking about. Look at his face; he's like not bothered by this moment. Look at his hand; he's sort of lifting it up almost as if it's nothing. He's not about to do a violent strike. He's kind of floating in space. Okay, we've got a fresco here, this time from Giacomo Jacariello. And again, now we're hitting like 1450 it's a great moment for Renaissance art, but it's a great time for the Gothic as well. And the Gothic really has its zenith up until like maybe 1550, if that makes sense, which is the same time as Titian. You know, people forget. Now, what do they emphasize with this kind of high Gothic period? Again, well, it's about even more detail. It's about even more kind of quality of painting, but with still kind of the interesting elements to it. So, for example, you can see these again, the stylized landscape here. Again, look at the kind of looseness here from the fresco work. Just very roughly, just a line of paint is all this guys had time to do before the plaster sets.
Are those tiny trees down there?
Yeah, they're tiny trees. Yeah, I can't tell if it's an attempt to kind of show far off perspective, or again just a stylistic choice to not pull away from St. George here. You know what I'm saying? I think because again, look at the beautiful green of the background here. I think that's a purposeful choice, and this wonderful blue box at the same time. Very fascinating, very mysterious. What's the point of the box? Well, it's partly ornamental for the space, but it's also about, you know, creating a bit of pop for the for St. George as well. Again, look at the fabrics across here. This is a Florentine example here with a silver brocade. Just the attention to detail on that fabric alone is just ridiculous. And you've got this rather, again, quite ugly looking queen princess, really, but she's been beautifully detailed at the same time. So I quite like this this piece. Okay, now we're entering what's known as the kind of the High Gothic, or the Northern Renaissance, as well as known as. Now, what's the big innovation at this time? Well, it's the use of oil as a medium. So what do we talk about when we talk about medium? Well, it's how do we get pigment to go from a powdered solid to a liquid to be able to paint it, and B, how do we get it to stick on to the surface? And linseed oil does stick several days or several weeks or whatever. And so we've got the
You're just cutting out there, Ferro, I'm afraid. Can
you hear me?
You can hear you now, yes. You're back now.
Yeah, sorry, I think my signal went for a second. I don't know how much you missed of that, but basically the big advantage of the oil painting was its ability to blend, basically. So you can see with some of the fresco work, you've got these definite blocks of color. While look at the bottom of the horse here, you've got this beautiful gradient coming in. So it adds a lot more realism into your painting by using oil paints. But what do you lose? Well, I think there's a drabness to this. Compare the kind of colours and the kind of the overall look and feel to some of the tempera works or the frescoes. It's much more like darker in tone, although that is also a definite color choice of the Northern Germans here. This is by Philippe Sauvin Magnet. This is actually another French. It's a French work, the French German. So I'm going to include that as part of my analysis. Now, one interesting innovation is the use of background storytelling. So we've got a couple of, there's lots, sort of like 3, maybe even 4 different like layers of storytelling. We've got St. George slaying the dragon. Note again, his armor and attire has been updated for the current age. This kind of like lovely little cap across here. I mean, this has got to be the most grotesque, ugly dragon we've seen so far. This is almost demonic. I hate it. Really, it's really, really gross. Yeah, I don't know. You know, literally that kind of like the dangle on the head there. Truly horrible. Yeah. Then we've got the princess set in the background across here. So again, this is the reason why George is here. Then we've got the king and queen who have commanded him to be sent out. Now, I would say, obviously, by the 1450, this is kind of like the golden legend version of the story. This is your classic St. George telling where he's kind of rescuing the princess from the dragon because they sacrifice someone to the dragon every year. Now, so you've got this kind of like multi-layered approach. There is also a big emphasis on the kind of the detail of the background as well. So you can see that, why is there a castle here? Why is there all of this emphasis on trees? Well, it's to place the figure into the position, but also to because the Gothic mind is interested in detail, it's interested in layers, and also look at the kind of color variation as well. He's using it as a form of perspective to make us feel like it's more real. I also love this disgusting, horrible, and I think it's a memento mori, basically at the bottom across here, where you've got this kind of man being half eaten by like a little baby dragon there. Truly horrific. Okay, let's go on. We've got another fresco here. This is I think this is a German one in 1470. But I think we are seeing some of the kind of more dynamic style coming through from the Renaissance. But again, just kind of compare some of those colors again. It's just all about brightness and freshness. There is some kind of stylization, if you remember back to the that Russian Byzantine fresco, but there is an attempt to do things like graduation. But it's interesting to see how they pull it off with a fresco. You can't blend, so what do? You have to kind of do these very fine brush strokes on top, layer things up to kind of create your graduations and your depth of color there. Okay, this was a really fine one. I really like this. By 1485, I would say this is the kind of peak of illuminated manuscripts. We're basically the illumination guys are about to be hit by the printing press in the same way that all service sector middle class people are about to be hit by AI in today's perspective. But you've got this kind of really interesting combination of mastery of technical ability. They still hold on to tradition, but there's a big experimentation going on, and I just think this is just so beautifully done here. I'm sorry I can't get a good zoom in on this. Either zoom in really close or really far. Okay, first off, let's talk about the shape. It's a roundel, which is kind of interesting. It gives you more space for the horse and the dragon and the princess. Yes, we've got some of that Gothic storytelling here where the king and queen are in the background in the castle. The princess is off on the side. And again, the dragon is your kind of more contemporary dragon. But I just love the pose of both the horse, where he's leaping through the air. The horse is kind of looking down, very dynamic. And this totally brilliant lancing position, legs forward, left hand is almost like, I'm going to call this the snooker. He's snookering that that dragon into pieces. And then just look at the kind of close-up technical detail. There's so much depth that they're achieving through this illustrative work, even though they can't blend. All of the kind of cross-hatching and highlighting in this face is very real to us, even though there's no blending whatsoever. So this is really like the peak of the medium, basically. I just love this. Again, note all of the attention to detail for the background. Like, again, there is this kind of jankiness with the castle, but again, part of it is a stylistic choice. Like, all of the trees look in a specific sort of way. Although notice how we've kind of moved away from the kind of pure Byzantine rock effect. Now, interestingly, Snow White, the Disney movie, the background artist was really inspired by this period of time, and several other French book of hours. And if you look in the background and spend some time, you'll see that he made all of the like trees squares and have these kind of stylistic like notes, which specifically hark back to this kind of high period of illumination. Okay, one master work to another. Now, I apologize for this picture because the problem is it's a really huge statue, and I think it's quite difficult to kind of see it all. This is in Stockholm in Sweden by Bernd Notke, who is another German who was brought up there by one of the Swedish emperors, and it's a horse rampant sculpture with St. George slaying him with a sword. The dragon is below him. He's already taken a spear. You can see he's snapped it out, and that's here's for the sword to finish it off. I mean, this is kind of Gothic abundance, over the topness. I mean, firstly, let's talk about the horse. Notice how you never have a horse in full regalia. Whenever you see like a Renaissance horse, they're just not interested. They want to show off their anatomical knowledge, and you can't do that with dress. Again, this is again interesting, a mindset change. The Goth doesn't care about everyone is like, oh, Michelangelo is amazing because he knows about that one muscle that you activate when you squish your left finger down. You must have seen that meme before. And I'm just kind of like, is that an amazing artistic ability, or is it just extreme pedantic autism placed into sculpture? Like, what does it say about humanity itself? It's just like reading. You're just really good at remembering stuff, or like, I'm just joking a little bit here, but Michelangelo, what he cares about is the form of muscles and muscle groupings. While the Goth, he cares about the overall look and the kind of the vision. And it's just, I think the horse itself is just so glorious. All of the kind of the brass work and detail. The painting itself is lovely. I'm pretty sure it's all based on a wood sculpture. The dragon is also just absolutely wild. I mean, I think it looks a little bit special effects, if I'm honest with you, nowadays. I think this was so subjected to movie stuff, but I'm a big fan. But again, note the kind of almost serene expression on St. George here, that the hand up, there's such lightness to it. This is again this anti-dynamism that I'm talking about from the Gothic mindset. But this is a real Gothic masterpiece, one of the best Gothic sculptures, I think, out there. Okay, I put this in because this was quite amusing, because this was the only bald George and the Dragon I could find. We're all about. I'm all about diverse and gorgeous here. And who's repping for the bald St. George's? I mean, one thing I would say is that wood carving is like what is okay, right. Renaissance tends to gravitate around marble, because that's Italy is the center of that. But because the Gothic is so centered in the north, where there's basically no marble at all, stuff tends to be sculpted in wood. Like all of the best German sculptures in wood, or in bronze. There's a lot of good bronze sculpture, and this is another wood piece here. I mean, this one was kind of like a bit of an amuse-bouche. I like the baldness. I like this kind of like, this is the most ratty dragon. There's so much dragon innovation. This is what I'm saying again. Like, I think something like the dragon is this is where the Goths get to say, just how to get to have fun. This is the deranged imagination. Every single artist is coming up with some kind of horrifically freakish and hideous monstrosity as well. But I think a relatively nice piece there. Okay, we've got this one, which is the whole. This is another English one here. The family of Henry VII with St. George in the background. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about it, because this was on one of your lists of ones to include, Nathan. So if not, I can kind of talk through it.
I'll just say a little bit about the context in that for Henry Tudor, it was quite important to identify himself with an English hero, because when he challenges Richard III for the throne of England, he primarily lends himself to the Arthurian. I'm the inheritor of Arthur because of my Welsh heritage, and thus I'm going to reinstitute the kind of golden age of Arthur. But if you're coming in from this kind of Welsh perspective, that leaves then your English subjects thinking, well, this is a Welsh king now. Do we actually have a king who represents England? And so Henry and his descendants make a very conscious effort to really tie themselves to St. George. So it's really interesting that he's having this done on an altarpiece. And I think Henry VIII, who's one of his sons in this picture, takes this even a step further, and I think we'll see that in terms of kind of elevating St. George's Day, in actually being St. George in tournaments, having coins with St. George on them. So yeah, the Tudors really max out St. George, perhaps because of a deficiency in their own Englishness, as it were.
That's very interesting. One stylistic thing I wanted to note that we saw in another earlier painting was the princess holding a lamb.
Yeah.
And I think it's one thing that's interesting is, if you remember that Sienese painting at the start, the princess holds the dragon. The princess holding the dragon, I think, has like a different connotation, because it's almost like that's her pet. And I wonder whether the princess with lamb is an attempt to retcon that tradition, because I think it becomes a little bit too subversive, if that makes sense. Like, why is the princess in charge of this terrible monster? So I think she gets a nice little cuddly pet instead, a lovely, beautiful, innocent lamb.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Ferro.
No, that was all I'd say.
As far as I know, the first time I found it in a literary source is from the Italian poet Mantuanus, who's writing in the 15th century. It's his version of the poem, which somebody like Spencer has read, for example. There's no kind of real explanation for it. It's just the princess leads out a sheep, and I suppose there's Christ-like symbolism of being sacrificed, the sacrificial lamb. But it's interesting that it comes about in this period, and I think you're right that there is a renewed nervousness around female power and authority within the Renaissance period. Yeah, the dangerous women, and Tudor England will know all about that very soon. So maybe it's a bit pressing.
If only he did the warnings of the past. I'm only joking. Right. Okay, on to a classic. Albrecht Dürer, the artist entrepreneur. Is Dürer working in the Gothic style, or is he in the Renaissance style? That's the question. Dürer went to he was in communication with Titian. He's spent time and traveled to Italy, which is very unlike, there was virtually no travel back in those days. So he was kind of unique to have that kind of connection. But his works are still undeniably Gothic in their imagination and their first principles. But he's still, because he is truly a Renaissance master at the same time, because this is the best depiction of a horse we've seen to date. This is a perfect horse, even though, again, I think this is one of his woodcuts. So when he does his etchings, it gets even better. But think about woodcuts. Again, another medium here. It's a print medium. And what are you doing? Well, you're carving out the negative space for your print. So anything white has been carved out. Now, I just want you to try and I think you have to have a real special brain to be able to work out like where shadow is, and then to invert it, and then to sort of carve these delicate lines out around it. Look at the little cross hatching here of the cast shadow of the other leg of the horse there. It's just so insane to me. And again, look at the face here. Like woodcut, because you basically can't cut like with too much detail, because you kind of knock out the pieces, right? So it's actually a very like light medium. That's why it was the choice of the German expressionists in the 20th century who wanted these kind of big, bold designs. But Dürer takes it as far as I think you physically can do. But like he still manages to distill down what a horse is. Here's a horse face in just a couple of lines. This is very lightly done, but still magnificent. The pose is great, and again, just there is a real nasty intensity to St. George here. I think his schnoz is quite big here. He's got a big old nose, but it almost acts like a mask around him. Here you can see he's added a couple of lines for the cast shadow from the helmet here. This is the least serene, most kind of grim, realist St. George we've had so far. So again, this is why this is the kind of high Gothic period, really.
I love how sorry, I was just going to say, I love how George and the dragon are staring each other in the eye as well with that vicious look. It's like proper confrontation now.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's and the spear going in again. I just want to shout out the princess here. It's just phenomenal. It's just so lightly done. It's just a little throwaway piece. This is just a couple of centimeters big, and he's managing to depict everything. Slightly derpy sheep there. Not going to lie, but you know, everyone's got their problems. Beautiful piece there from Dürer. I've put the Raphael in the wrong place. Ignore this. Ignore that one. That's meant to be in the Renaissance. We'll go there in a second. Okay. We've got some imperial chiaroscuro. Okay, chiaroscuro is the high point of woodblock printing. It's part Gothic, part Renaissance. Again, it gets picked up by a lot of the Renaissance people. How do you describe chiaroscuro? Chiaroscuro is all about light and darkness, but stylistically, it's the use of bold graphic colors as part of your wood block. So again, remember, for each color you put in, that's a new block. So this is a multi-block print. And we mentioned about the kind of insane level of detail that's going on here. Again, this is, you're pushing your wood to the very limit. This is by Hans Birkmayer. This is kind of like one of the high pieces of the high times in the Habsburgs. So the Austrian emperor he's head of the HRE. He was kind of pulling in. He was trying to create a real kind of like German centered Gothic Renaissance, basically, that's going on, and he's funding it. Think of it like almost like Medici, but for the north. And this piece, I think, is just totally phenomenal, just from its technical ability. But again, it's Gothic emphasis here. Now, notice how that you can't see a single muscle from St. George here. He's just fully clad in this kind of amazing attire, this kind of almost like skirt-like fabric across here, the feather from the head. Again, look at the disdain in the face. Like, you know, I think this totally outshines Dürer's work. I hate to say it. And we've got this kind of, again, savage moment of victory. And you can see his lance snapped in half. He's kind of like, he's already done the deed and he's just kind of walking off afterwards. So again, but interestingly, there are some kind of Renaissance-y elements. Notice the emphasis on perspective here. So again, something that the Renaissance guys are interested in were displaying towns and cities, because that gives you easy ways to kind of show perspective, and you can see everything is going to a vanishing point here. This guy has been centered, and this is the first kind of like countryside background we've seen. One other thing I want to mention is that kind of use of this lovely middle tone here, this kind of sepia brown. A lot of these kind of chiaroscuro print guys would use a middle tone or a couple of tones in the center to allow them to kind of add additional emphasis. So you can see here the woman on the right hand side here, we've got the highlights in white, the line work, and then some of the shade in black, and then the middle tone kind of, that's the neutral center. So it kind of adds even more depth to your woodcut, but it's even harder because everything has to be registered off the other. Like, how do you then you have to transfer the original design onto the highlight block, etc. So real nightmare to actually do in reality, but beautiful piece here. So what does Dürer do in response to that? Well, he ups his game. Dürer going from woodcut to etching is like, I mean, it's like phenomenal. What's the difference? Well, instead of carving from a very fragile piece of wood, you are scratching into a copper plate, a piece of metal instead. What does that let you do? Well, you can do some tons more detailed work. So you can do much more thinner lines, much more depth of tone at the same time. So Dürer's not relying on kind of fancy midtones or anything like that. He's just using the kind of cross hatching from the shade again, and he's trying to show this off to us. He was like, yeah, your chiaroscuro is great, but look how I can get the darkness through dots and dashes of etching here. Look at the darkness at the front of this horse. And again, this is him. Like Dürer, in my mind, is the true Renaissance man because he combines the Northern Renaissance with the Southern. We've got all the kind of the detailing on the horse, the muscles, etc. You can, again, that's very Renaissance-y to kind of show off all of these different parts, the accuracy. But then George himself, we don't even get to see his face at all. It's all about his armor, his pose, his majesty. Again, this is such a Gothic pose of strength. And I mean, I don't really like his dragon. That's the only thing I would say. But I think, Dürer's etchings are just out of this world. And I still don't think, maybe in the early 20th century, we reached the same levels of this work with a few artists. But it's truly, masterwork. I mean, the thing is, everything is going to be a come down after seeing some of these some good pieces here. This is from the yeah. This is again another German piece. I think why I chose this was because it was part of like an interior decoration, if that makes sense. I think this is on a wood panel in someone's house, I think. So this is the Meister de Dolbener. Okay, I'm not even going to try and do the German for that. And what's to say about this? I mean, it's an interesting use of color. At the same time, you can see it's like a relatively tight color scheme. The kind of the blacks and the yellows is very Germanic, with a little bit of red in the background. Look at these kind of lovely. This is as much a landscape as it is an action piece. And again, we've got this kind of dynamic storytelling where you've got, is that St. George in the background with the princess, and there's the princess with the lamb. So again, there's almost kind of like storytelling going on as part of it. Okay, well, I mean, we've seen the masterful woodcuts of Dürer. This is kind of like England's the best that England could do at the time, sadly. But this is one of the illustrations for Caxton's Golden Legend, which is fundamentally important, I think, for British culture, both as a literary source, but also as an artistic source as well. I'm sure you've got something to say about Caxton for a couple of minutes.
What I would say about Caxton, so he publishes this in 1483, as we talked about in our King Arthur series. He published the Mort de Arthur, or the Death of Arthur, by Thomas Malory in 1485. Really, his printing establishes a kind of mass culture, or the new canon for the mass culture that printing allows for. and really provides a new matter of England as a consequence. I would tie into that as well, that his choice of George is interesting because we know that George and the Dragon is often performed in public ceremonies, in pageants, in towns, in royal courts, and so on during this period. So, in a way, he's kind of formalizing what's being played out on a folk level for many people across England. He's kind of giving it a definition, or this is the official story now. Maybe closing down some of the divergences, but also giving it a degree of legitimacy in this new medium, which I think is quite important, that it's something which can be consumed by the masses now, as opposed to a manuscript or one sculpture in a place where, okay, some people can see it, but not everyone. Most people can see Caxton's work now and hear it being read and see this picture.
Finally, we're democratizing art, Nathan. I'm just joking here, but you're right. Like I like that idea of it kind of being like a solidification. And again, I think stories and art have those moments. There's these moments of rapid creation, lots of divergence, and then also putting together at the same time and perfection. It just depends on the time and the era and the mood. I mean, is this piece the most outstanding technical ability we've seen? No. Is it the most brilliant from like even a creative perspective? No. But what this does have is a kind of beautiful simplicity at the same time that makes it iconic in my mind. And this sort of haunts the imagination of all book illustrators in England from this point. It's that important in terms of how it's been used. And so I think you just gotta respect it in that regard. I mean, I still think that the way that we see the dragon in England is because of Caxton. Basically, this could be straight. You could plonk that on the Welsh flag and painted it red. Anyway, lovely piece here. Now, I found this really quite sublime piece here from Gerard Gregory, another French artist. Now, at first, I wasn't sure whether this was a value painting. So what artists sometimes do will be to either do a painting where they're sort of practicing the lights and darks of a painting without wasting money on the expensive pigments. But I believe this is actually like a Grise painting, where there's like a style of painting in this kind of like almost sculpturally stone light. Mantegna is quite famous for it, but I really love this just for its use of the gris. So again, this kind of like almost monotone nature, but also I think it's a very beautiful princess across on the left here. I think it's very Gothic at the same time, but it's not romanticized. Again, I think a lot of Victorian Gothic ends up becoming quite twee and quite sentimental, while I think there is this kind of you can see that she's at this moment of sadness and regret, and she was a sacrifice, but now something else is taking her place for her. Something else is being sacrificed. So it's really kind of like sad to see, but I think a very beautiful princess here. The dragon I'm less keen about. I think the pose is very awkward. You're looking at him from behind in a like a long foreshortened perspective, which again the artist does a very good job of, but it's just a very horrible creature. But I thought it was very, very interesting and very different. Speaking of something very different, I mean, I thought this was phenomenal from Lucas Cranach, the famous German painter. His Adam and Eve is very, very famous if you've seen that. Some of the ugliest women ever painted has been done by Cranach. I think very, very Germanic. I'm not a fan of the Cranach woman, but I thought this was really interesting, both in terms of its layout. So again, we've got the rectangle, but rather than the whole of St. George, we've got this zoom in moment. And we've got like a close up of the dragon. So I'd describe it as a very intimate painting. Now, Cranach he can really paint as well. Yes, it's Gothic. Yes, there's no emphasis on the perfection of form. But again, I think I was talking about those ideas of kind of fortitude and strength of the rock. That's what we're seeing here, that kind of Germanic Teutonic strength. He's just looking down at the dragon as if it's nothing to him. He's just disgusted at this vile beast, and he's about to smite him as if it's nothing to him. You are nothing to me, you disgusting little creature. Very novel in its layout. I've never seen anything like it since or before, and I think it's just a really outstanding painting. Also, sort of like the horse is kind of like looking at us, kind of like, "Are you seeing this? You seeing this, bro?" Really cool. I threw in a bit of stained glass here. Again, it's hard to, when you have a good painting, you can have a bit of a come down, seeing something a little less interesting. But again, like we haven't had too much of interest in other mediums, but stained glass was a thing. This was kind of interesting as it's the moment beforehand where I think he's speaking to the king just before he set off on his journey, and you can see him heading off in the background. I quite like that about, I think one element of the medieval is this like almost quantum storytelling. You know how in Revelations it talks about this is happening now, it will happen in the future. There's like a line like that.
Yeah.
That is how the medievals think about storytelling. It's this moment where everything's all happening at the same time. So I thought that was kind of interesting and quite cool to see something a little bit different. And then, I mean, I would describe this as bordering on bad taste here. This is a 16th century Swiss Gothic jewelry box thing with St. George and the Dragon, where St. George is just made out of jewels here. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is something like you'll see on like a Fabergé. Fabergé does St. George. When are we going to see that collab? I mean, this is not to my taste, and I think it's the worst kind of decadence, really, isn't it? But I included it just because it was a little bit interesting. Okay, are we ready for the next one? We've still got so much to go.
What's the next one, Ferro?
Okay. Let me just boot this up. It's the Renaissance. Now, note that we're going back to 1400s here. So, like, okay. I think it's just it's art isn't like fixed in the same kind of way that like maths or science is. You've got your periodic table where you can kind of identify groups. In fact, I think it's a very Germanic thing, that the need to categorize and put stuff into groups. But I think you've got to see art as movements and waves and harmonies and rhythms, as opposed to these fixed things. We're going to start off with Donatello here. Donatello, the sculptural master, but also he has an early Gothic career, and this is some marble work as part of an altar here, and you can see his knight, again, fully dressed in that kind of Gothic style, but very dynamic at the same time. You can see the kind of the cape flying, the horse's hooves in the air, and actually the princess has been turned into this kind of like classical beauty, as opposed to Gothic princess. And this is all about realism at the same time. So Donatello already starting to skirt around mixing Gothic and the classical. Now, his most famous St. George is this piece here, which is very magnificent. Again, this is you can see this in the Cast Gallery in the V&A Museum. This is his most Gothic work. It's St. George. I think it sits in a corner in Florence, where it originally did. Go on, Nathan.
No, I don't know. I'm afraid. I'm just nodding along.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me, but why is this Gothic? Yes, it's idealized. Like, look at the face, look at the nobility. This could be a Roman statue, but he's fully clothed. There's no emphasis on the body, and the pose again has that kind of stillness and staticness. That's Gothic. So definitely kind of going between the lines. But the Renaissance has properly kicked off now, and we're going to see the first of two Paolo Uccello paintings. Uccello in Vasari. Vasari kind of mentions Uccello as this kind of artist who locks himself up in his room and spends all his time researching perspective to such a degree that Michelangelo like knocks on the door and says, "Dude, you should just like do some actual painting. Just go and actually paint for a while, dude. You're quite good." This one, like, I'm not so keen on. Like, again, it does show a couple of things. You've got some of that kind of Gothic storytelling in the background here. You've got this like quasi-Byzantine cave, but you've got the trio here, the kind of use of the three motif, which again is very novel and again very Renaissance-y. We've got the dragon who's kind of been placed upwards this time. St. George coming in from the right. Again, like, Uccello's horses are really good. I really rate. If you see some of his other paintings, he does a lovely horse, and you can see this is also a tricky pose because it's not a horse in profile; it's a horse in 3/4. So this is actually like quite complicated to do and very very advanced over several other artists. I think this is decent, but his other one that's coming up in a second is better. Now, one of my favourite St. George's of all time is this Pisanello fresco, which is in... I've forgotten now. Is it in Padua, I think? Pisanello is he Gothic? Is he Renaissance? I mean, I still put him in the Renaissance gang because he's Italian. But I mean, you can see in his figures that it's very... he does the kind of high Gothic thing. Now, this is interesting because it's a fresco, but he pumps so much detail into it. There's two halves to it. On the left-hand side, which has been heavily degraded, is the dragon here. Now, Pisanello, he is the master of the animal at the same time. So you can see here, the dragon's down here. He's got his little dragon babies, and there's some kind of dead animals across here. You've got like a deer jumping across. Now, bearing in mind this in fresco, the detail that he's able to achieve is just off the chart. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the kind of princess and George about to set off on his journey. He's used the space brilliantly. You know, he's managed to squish all of the detail inside there, but without having to compromise on like the size of proportion of people. I think I've got a zoom in here, have I? Don't know. Is this loading up for everyone? There we go. So I don't know if that's clearer. There we go. So you've got the kind of the scene of the kings and queens in the background. You've got the princess across here. Yes, there's kind of like a few kind of Byzantine elements here, but again, just look at the detailing on the dogs and the animals. I think he just does it so nicely. But he still has a bit of stylistic elements, like the boat coming in across on this side, and then the city in the background. Now, I think there's a bigger story to this because I think like one of the last Byzantine emperors is doing a tour of Italy at the time, and he ties this into Trebizond, which is kind of like it's where Pontus was as well, in like northern Anatolia, basically, and also it was like an independent kingdom after the Byzantines got wrecked. So it's that he's kind of doing it. He's contextualizing it in the Byzantine context as well. But just spend some time with this. It's really beautiful. It's very degraded work, so it's hard to see all of the detail. But I think really beautiful. And again, like the horse from this perspective is the thing is this image is so high resolution. I zoom in and it just melts my computer. Like the horse in this perspective is very difficult to do. And again, you don't see anyone else attempting to have a horse like this at all for years, basically. Okay. Bernat Maritel. I don't know much about this guy, if I'm honest with you. I presume it's hold on a second. This is probably more Gothic, isn't it? We'll have a quick look. Anyway, one thing I would say about this is it's got a good use of the kind of rectangle space here, and you can see how he's got these kind of lines coming down to kind of move the eye. The cave has been used as a device to sit the princess on top, and you can see these little kind of baby lizard salamanders above the cave. Quite a nice piece. Lots of interesting stuff around perspective as well. Okay, now we've got Jacopo Bellini. There's two Bellinis, Gentile and Jacopo, and Jacopo is like the less successful of the two here. This is one of his designs for a bigger painting that he was doing. The Bellini brothers are interesting because they are heavily influenced by Byzantines through their connection to Venice, but also the Northern Renaissance through their trade networks. But also, but even Venice is like the last holdout of the Gothic, really, in Italy. But even they sort of get converted along with Mantegna towards the end of their lives. And I would say that this is again a very Renaissance-y style piece. Look at the emphasis on the horse. I mean, it's quite cool. I quite like the arms on the dragon here are quite mannish. You've got the muscles of it, and for kind of like etching, I think it's quite cool. I just had this as a little amuse-bouche. I saw this was a kind of a Renaissance button with a St. Georgian carved out of mother of pearl here. So you can see the dragon here at the bottom, the horse, and then this enormous, ridiculously large sword. But that kind of gives it this kind of dynamic emphasis and power, and I just really like this as like a little small something a little bit different to some of all of these paintings we've seen. This is annoying. Again, unlike the Pisanello, which was too many JPEGs, this does not have enough JPEGs. This is I mentioned Venice being the kind of last holdout of the Gothic in Italy. This is Carlo Crivelli, the master of tempera. Crivelli pushes tempera painting to its very limit and is one of the last tempera masters. We've got this really weird design. It's a long rectangle, St. George in 3/4. The horses, again, that's just such a difficult pose to do. Horses are already, I'd say, next to humans, the second most difficult creatures to depict well, because they have a very distinctive silhouette, and we're quite familiar with them. So you can tell when a horse has been done badly. But the pose of St. George is just totally brilliant. I mean, he's taken that kind of Gothic quietness and just added like a savage energy to it at the same time. If you know anything about Crivelli paintings, they're kind of laden with symbology. You also have this kind of lovely golden background, again, like a little nod to the High Gothic. And another thing you don't pick up on, he uses a lot of gesso work in his paintings where he creates texture through plaster. So all of the kind of horse brasses at the front here are actually kind of in 3D. So that adds a bit of depth to it. I mean, I love the color of the dragon here as well. Just the color, landscape, and language. This is tempera at its kind of peak. There you go. You can see some of that kind of gesso work here. This is like a random Lombard one. I think I'm not even going to bother with this because it's not as good as some of the other stuff. Okay, this is the other Uccello St. George. This is, in my opinion, the Uccello. The other one was just like, that's just a warm up for this masterpiece. You know, the first time I saw this was at an art appreciation class at school, and this was the piece that the deputy head who was running it had chosen. I had no idea about it whatsoever, and I didn't really like it at the time, but it's something that stayed with me, and I think it's at the National Gallery, isn't it? And it's a very captivating piece, filled with symbology and interest. So a couple of interesting things. Yes, it's the moment of victory, but Uccello returns us to the princess holding onto the dragon as opposed to the sheep here. So again, that dangerous woman idea. And I love her little hand expression here, her hands out, kind of like, what are you doing to my evil pet dragon here? Like, why are you doing that? Or is she kind of mourning the dragon, again, his life versus hers kind of thing, you know, that kind of interesting piece. Let's talk about perspective again. You know, we saw that kind of relatively, a little bit janky, sorry to say, Crivelli, 3/4 rearing horse. Look, I mean, Uccello just absolutely nails it here. This is perfection of perspective, and the horse just looks so well rendered. In fact, if anything, I think he's placed it too far forward. It's been, do you know what I'm saying? If you think about the angles of that, I think it could just about work.
Yeah.
But it sort of blows your mind a little bit. But I do, the horse here is lovely. We've also got to talk about this cave here. His last cave was just so boring, and this is just like really weird. It's not really Byzantine, but it has like a jaggedness and a coldness to it at the same time. Like an egg has been hatched open, but it's like an egg out of like a horrible sharp creature or monster. One last thing to say is the symbology and the use of the circle here. The dragon has these big circles on its wings. The horse has the circles on the horse brass, the circles of the armor. The cloud itself has been turned to a circle at the top there, or is it an eye? What does it mean? I still don't know. After all of these years, I've never had a strong thought about the circle symbology. I just know that he's put it in there, and it just drives me nuts every single day whenever I see this painting, thinking about it.
You don't have any guesses at all or any conjectures?
I mean, it's the target.
Mm-hmm.
It's the eye. Those, I think the eye is the one that I've heard other people say before, where it's kind of like, but I think Uccello is cleverer than that. I think it means something else, and I just don't know what it is. Also, shout out to that tail, because look at that phenomenal tail here. I think if he had just had like a better front of the dragon, this would be just like genuinely one of the best works of the Renaissance. No, it's okay. This is great. Vittore Carpaccio. Really interesting long format piece here. So instead of the kind of like tall rectangle, we've got St. George as a jouster here. Now, again, Carpaccio is sort of operating in this kind of post-Renaissance, post-Gothic Venice, really, where again the background has been beautifully rendered, just like something out of a Raphael painting, but there's still kind of very Gothic elements, like the fully suited proper knight here. This, you know, the dragon itself is straight out of the Gothic imagination, but really interesting format. I've heard that it's an analogy for the Ottomans versus the Venetians before. That's one of the readings into it, which is interesting. Could be. Now, one interesting thing is that to see it in the space that it's in, because you just got to, like, one thing that's great about Venice is some of the most beautiful interiors ever. I mean, I think it's just phenomenal. I mean, I prefer the true Gothic Venetian interior, but this is still pretty amazing. Love the roof here, gorgeous exposed ceiling blocks, diapered marble for the floor, walnut burr inlays on the wall, and then even better than that, some of the most brilliant paintings ever produced by man on the wall. I mean, you can't beat that for an interior. And then all of a sudden the format makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's meant to be on the top here. It's at walking height. It's also part of a bigger narrative story. Again, all tying into this theme of Ottomans versus the Venetians. What a spectacular room! I'm a real big fan of art in context like this. I think it's we need more of it. Or we need a return to that. Okay. Now, by the time we've reached the 1500s, we've had like Raphael. This is why the Pre-Raphaelites are so obsessed with that kind of moment, because Raphael does sort of really signal the shift to kind of to like neoclassicism for real. This is by a guy called Sodoma. He has a different name, like an Italian name, but I think yes, this is kind of pen name. Now, but I think this is still really interesting. But look at the figure here. Gone is your fancy Gothic armor, and now there's an emphasis on the body. You know, this exposed arm. Would any knight go into battle with his right arm exposed like that? Why is this guy wearing parade armor? This kind of ridiculous Roman fancy armor as part of his kind of like battle. You know, it's not about utility or reality here. It's about showing the perfection of man through his form. You know, this almost kind of transcendent figure. You've got the princess here. She's still a little bit medieval still, but again, the kind of the big robe again marks this move to heading towards the classical. And even the dragon, I think, is kind of been like subdued in terms of the imagination. There's going to be the amount of dragon innovation we're going to see from now on massively goes down, basically. I mean, some really lovely backgrounds in here. You can see how like Fragonard and like the kind of French school comes out of this space. You know, this kind of beautiful emphasis on background. I love these kind of figures here, lightly painted, very beautiful. Tintoret does two brilliant St. George's. So Tintoret, again, Venetian. So the Venetians basically have a comeback where, yes, they're great in the high Gothic, but then they're like, oh yeah, we're going to be like some of the greatest painters in the kind of neoclassical Renaissance as well. The trinity of painters are Titian, Veronese, and Tintoret or Tintoretto. And this is his first St. George, 1520. So, I mean, this is just, I'm sorry, Florentine lovers, leave the room now. This is a Venetian stream. I mean, this just blows Raphael just totally away in terms of the depth, but also, of course, the colors. You know, that's what Ruskin always says about the Venetian painters. It's the kind of use of color. I mean, the horse is phenomenal here. Look at the shading on it. This is horse realism to a new level. The kind of the use of a dead body here just to show off that kind of classical skill. Again, it's interesting again how Tintoret he's gone for a fully armored knight, as should be really, but he's got him in these kind of like the kind of the flowing cape. That's kind of like the kind of classical flourish. But then he said, "Oh, I am going to include the ideal body, but it's going to be the ideal dead body, the ideal half-eaten body of the dragon." The dragon itself is this kind of I don't like it so much, but again, I mean, you could look at the colors of it. Tintoret in particular, his color palette is very distinct. It's these dual tones. Look at the greens. They're not really like greens of nature. They're like the greens of a turquoise, or not even a turquoise, like a deep emerald or something like that. You know, it's much more deeper, much more blue tinted, and then he likes pinks and purples as well. Really beautiful piece here. But then, see, this was down as a Tintoret, but I thought this is a Titian painting, but maybe it is Tintoret still. But then he does it again in a really interesting novel format. Excuse the stock footage. This was just, I had to compromise because it had a better image here. And this is the first time we've seen the scene from the perspective of the princess here. And again, rather than, Uccello's princess who's just been like, what are you doing? What are you doing, buddy? She is getting out of here. And again, I think this is what I'm saying about what I love about humans and our ability and the imagination is you can have a scene and you can think of it in 1,000 different ways. And this is what I'm talking about here. The actual battle is going on in the background here. So again, this is Tintoret showing off again. Oh, look, I can paint a horse in 3/4 view, etc. Oh yeah, I can also paint a perfect man here. Here's my excuse to paint a perfect man here. But then it's like, oh yeah, but what would a princess really do in that situation? And she would get out of there as soon as the battle had started, wouldn't you? And you've got this moment of flight here.
Absolutely.
She's not even looking backwards, and I really like that for its novelty. But again, I think she's very, very beautiful at the same time. And the Venetians never go too classical. Yes, the kind of flowing fabrics, etc., instantly evoke that. But again, there's something a bit gothicy about it as well at the same time.
I think what to me was interesting there as well is what you picked up on about her distinction from the dragon. Her color palette matches George's, not the dragon's, whereas in Uccello's it is very, very similar. Yeah,
that's a good. I didn't mention that as a good shout. And now I think basically we're moving into the kind of neoclassical phase here with these kind of ridiculous outfits and ridiculous poses as well. Okay, so let's go into the next one. We're going to do this, boys. I'm gonna speed up though. We're gonna have to speed run this because otherwise, I don't know how you've got planned for tomorrow. Cancel your plans now, Nathan, because you're gonna have a St. George hangover here. I've got a small section on neoclassical. I mean, the neoclassical not that interested on this motif, unsurprisingly, compared to the classical modes. Kind of a couple of interested pieces. This is from Gilles Cognet. I think he's a duchy, and again, you can tell he's a Dutch from number one, the quality of oil painting. What happens with the Northern Renaissance with all of that Gothic art? Well, it turns into stuff like this. It turns into your Van Dycks, where they keep a lot of the. I mean, again, the Gothic imagination is still there, I think, but again, you've got these kind of beautiful nudes here, which again is derived from classical models. Again, I love the sheep here, the most mournful sheep we've seen so far. I mean, I quite like this for a kind of a neoclassical piece. The colours in this are phenomenal as well. The kind of the there's a darkness to this painting, very much so. So, and again, there's like a savage intensity with the St. George.
You almost feel like he's fighting on the verge of hell with that color scheme, actually.
Yeah, you're really right. Yeah, and again, look at the blending on the horse. Just lovely shading here. Lovely horse. Okay, of course, can't talk about neoclassical without talking about Rubens. Rubens very indebted to Titian. He's like a Titian fanboy. He copies Titian, loves Titian's works, but what does he do? He tries to take it further. He moves outside of the color palette. Again, this is what I'm talking about. There's an unrealness to a lot of this work. Like, look at the hair of the mane of the horse, right? Never looks like that in reality. Your horse can jump about how it likes. It never is that beautiful. So there's almost an abstract quality to it. There's an almost surrealness, I think, to this kind of work, where this isn't what happens in reality, but this is what should happen in reality. Or maybe you have it for that perfect moment in that iconic. You see it in a film or whatever. That's the slow motion moment for us. That's what these guys are capturing here. Again, we've got an interesting 3/4 pose, but then Rubens is showing off his skills even more by rotating the St. George further back. Again, he's got him in this ridiculous parade armor again to show the shading and all of the muscles here. I mean, just this right arm is phenomenal. He's got him looking down again, showing the kind of again. It's a lot of doing art is about showing off what you can do here, and this is about showing off in about 10 different ways. But he's still got the armor there, so he still does this lovely shading on the armor again. That just looks so real to us. And he's actually taken the stocking off, and again, just to show the detailing on the legs there. What do I think of the dragon? I mean, there's something very horrific about it. It's not really defined. It sort of blends into the background a little bit. So it's not really about the dragon. It's about this kind of victorious moment. And then we've got the princess here as this kind of like busty maiden in the background holding onto her sheep. I mean, I don't think this is one of Rubens's best works, if I'm honest with you, but I'm really against St. George and parade armor. I think it just looks so stupid, and I don't really like the colors in this. Like the Gillis color scheme is much tighter, but obviously, like Rubens' rendering is phenomenal, and again, he's one of the greatest. Like renderers or like paintings of realism that have ever existed. This is kind of interesting. This was a Domenichino painting where again there is the fight happens in the background, and this is kind of like the moment afterwards where St. George again becomes this quiet saint. The neoclassical guys just love these like whatever happy saints posing on a cloud kind of thing. That's the vibes, as opposed to your Gothic savageness here. Look at this; it's a moment of serenity and peace and calm, and what a lovely St. George, very happy, very nice. Let's keep on going. Hold on. You know what? Let's finish on this one. This was kind of like an ivory, and I get it. I think this is kind of cool in terms of its work. This is done in kind of relatively shallow relief, but again, you can kind of see all of those stylistic choices mentioned in terms of armor, etc. Although it's interesting that this does get used as part of the famous sovereign coin that we'll see later. Okay, that's neoclassical done. Very small. I think we can do the rest in an hour. That's what I'm saying. I think we can do it all in an hour. We've got the 4 biggest sections to go, though.
You're really going to have to whistle stop 2 of them, then.
We will do. I'm just going to choose the best. I'll choose the best. Okay, we're going into. I hate this. This is my least favorite grouping because I'm such a nerd. I've called it Victorian and PRB, which in my opinion are 2 very different things. There's Victorian academicism in there, there's Victorian neo-Gothic, and then the PRB is its own separate thing. What's going on? You got to think of it as a reaction to like early Romanticism from the Royal Academy, with your Fuseli, for example. It's a reaction against boring classicism, and also it's a refocus on Quattrocentro, so that's that early Renaissance period, and Gothic works basically. Plus, also people are getting quite good at painting in general. That there's much more focus on human form, etc. So everything becomes very accurate. This piece is by William Bell Scott, and this is Una. So this is whenever it's an Una pieces, that's from
that's the Fairy Queen.
Yeah,
the Fairy Queen rendition of George and the Dragon, which is very the basics are there, but it expands it in whole other areas, like the princess basically being a character for once, and ending up with a lion at one point, which is quite fun.
Well, there she is with her lion, and I mean, again, if I was to tackle St. George again today, I think there's a whole lot of interesting stuff about the princess. I think she's underutilized. I mean, you can see the PRB influence instantly here. The focus on beautiful oak here, the naturalism. The face is quite like early romantic, like a William Blake face, etc. And it's about kind of like naturalism. Again, romanticism is a real focus on nature. Ruskin's return, go to nature, he says, and so we've got this kind of moment of serenity and peace, but there's darkness in the background at the same time. So there's a bit of a foreshadowing there. I'm just going to go for some of the best stuff. Let's just go this was interesting. This was Delaroche did a St. George, which I didn't realize. So again, the French, I don't know if you call them romantic painter so much, but again, like early academic painter. And this is very loosely done. It wasn't a full painting, but this was at the Louvre. I thought it was quite cool. Okay, let's get some PRB bangers in here. This is Rossetti doing his designs for William Morris stained glass. What happened to Rossetti? My Rossetti, like 10 good years of work, and then like just genuinely absolutely fell off. His early stuff is just phenomenal, and it's because he really focuses on the medieval. Has a simplicity of form, but still is just so heroic in a non-Gothic way. So again, you can see this is what I'm saying about the Romantic Gothic is very different to true Gothic. The Romantic Gothic is idealized. It's actually very classical in its first principles. So you can see here St. George here is this kind of handsome youth. If you just took that head by itself, you'd say that that's like a Greek statue, wouldn't it? Really?
Yeah.
The pose itself has to be kind of beautiful, but dynamic at the same time. The maiden is demure and floating in the background. She's not holding the dragon. She's been tied up to the tree. She's totally vulnerable. The Victorians are the original white knights. They're the original simps. This is a simp work of art. Putting the kind of princess as this totally helpless. I still like Uccello's holding the dragon princess. I mean, the dragon itself is quite derpy. I don't really like it that much, but again, it's a stained glass piece in a funny shape, and so he's crouched St. George down. So again, there's some great design work from Rossetti here, squeezing it all in. This was cool. This was a collab between William Morris and Philip Webb, his architect, for some hand-painted pieces for his Red House. And this is, you can see it's a couple of the different scenes. Again, interestingly, the focus on the princess, but the princess as like vulnerable woman. This isn't the princess as kind of like powerful woman. Here she is. She's been led off by the guards. Very, very sad. Then she's been attached to the pole, about to be eaten, rescued by St. George, and then triumphantly led back. So again, it's a real focus on the woman, but woman as vulnerable, woman as saved, woman as white knighted. Edward Poynter. This is really kind of like Poynter I would describe as like late Victorian academic painter, but this is St. George in Westminster. Is it Westminster or is it in Parliament? I can't remember. I think it could be in Parliament, actually. I've decided. Phenomenal piece of mosaic work here. I mean, you can tell it's that late Victorian piece, because it's late Victorian academic work is heavily classical influence. Think about your Alma Tadamas, who are doing these kind of big historical pieces. Again, the princess here is like Greek, but then his St. George is High Gothic at the same time. I mean, I really love the George here. Very, very cool. And I particularly like the dragon. This is one of my favorite dragons. Absolute flat head, totally destroyed. But again, one of the most beautiful mosaics we have in the country. Really lovely. This is from Emmanuel Fremont. Fremiet, sorry, I should say. The French do a lot of sculpture. We do PRB in England. What are the French doing? Well, they're doing naturalism and a ton of like quite kind of academic sculpture before Rodin steps in. Fremiet, like he pushes kind of realism in sculpture to the limit, really, and you've got this very kind of realist piece. I do really love the pose of this. Again, it's got that kind of extremeness of the angles, etc. And again, a beautifully rendered horse as well. Very cool. Okay, this was interesting. This was another Red Cross Knight, originally part of a triptych that I forgot to update this, Nathan. I'm sorry. But this is an embroidery, I believe, from Hilda Truckier. Do you know much about it at all when you include it? Oh, there we go.
I've got the book right here. Phoebe Anna Traquair. She was Edinburgh embroider, enameler. Was quite prolific in her time. She was very into kind of Neoplatonic, mystical ideas of the ascent of the soul, and the Red Cross Knight story is an allegory for various Protestant renderings of that. So she was very captured by this idea and did this triptych, which I think ties into a broader work in that respect. What's interesting here as well, I will add as well, in this period, and it's kind of obvious in some sense, but you kind of have to recognize it, is we're seeing St. George and the princess become lovers. And although there were stories like Richard Johnson's The Seven Champions of Christendom kind of bring that aspect to the fore, it's not a part of the original story. St. George is a saint who is martyred, right? He rides off into the sunset and doesn't become married to the princess. So this is a big change that they're emphasizing this aspect of it.
Yeah, that's great. Also, I like how this is not done by a simp. You can tell because it's like the woman stepping over the knight and kissing him. Yeah, it's very, very forward. It's not woman as this defenseless creature. It's she's choosing and grabbing him, which I quite like. And again, maybe that's the woman's perspective on the piece. I mean, again, this is like probably peak embroidery. We will never see embroidery as good as this. Okay, let's keep on going. This was kind of interesting one. It's actually from 1914 by Breton Riviere. Like PRBism and kind of academic stuff like dies with Waterhouse in 1919. Maybe it dies a little bit earlier than that, I can't remember. But it still does last into the Edwardian era. And I quite like this piece, which was St. George having defeated the dragon, but he's lost his horse. And he's kind of like lying down next to the dragon, reflecting on his victory. And again, just in terms of the framing is really interesting. The majority of the canvas is taken up by the dragon, but the horse is kind of like sitting dead next to the dragon. And George is sort of looking up in the air. You know, I think it's very, very novel again in terms of how he's laid stuff out, but there's real poignancy and like sadness and regret in St. George's face, I think. But also piety as well. He's also looking to God and thanking for his life, I think. But really interesting, something a little bit different. Alfred Drury, the famous new sculpture guy, did this. Not very new sculpture, so I put it in this pot. This is kind of like French academic realism, really. Not a fan. I mean, Ben Jones did an entire triptych again, similar to the Philip Webb piece. You know, obviously very, very good. Not my favorite. And again, I think he sort of treats this piece or the theme with Andromeda and Perseus, doesn't he? And does that like I think that is a way better piece, but there is more emphasis on the princess here. But I don't really like it because it's kind of like princesses, like the pathetic princess. Really, he's like bit rubbish. Okay, this is another early Rossetti piece. This is St. George and Princess Zabras. This is a different telling, so you can see this moment of intimacy between St. George and the princess in the background through the window. You can see this again. One of my favorite dragons. Well done, Rossetti. Fat lizard Rossetti. and the fat lizard's been brought into town triumphantly. So again, really novel moment. Everything, all the focus has been on the moment of action, or just before or after. What happens after you've killed the dragon? Well, you're gonna have a big party to celebrate, and that's going on outside. But the princess doesn't care about that. She almost kind of looks like she's been traumatized by the whole experience, but she's holding up this this cup for George and having just such an intimate moment with him, leaning on him as he kind of looks out. But there is no happiness. It's interesting again if you see a lot of other, Rossetti's other works. He has a lot of these kind of like men and women together in like rooms. If you remember with Arthur, there's the Guinevere and Lancelot piece, which is kind of similar. The room is a place of intimacy where secrets happen. And again, this isn't an illicit connection by any means, but I think it's a reflection on like what's just happened and service and true love, etc. as well. Love the wallpaper here as well. Again, this is just Rossetti at his best, really, in my opinion.
There's a bit more context to that one, and this one as well, because it's both the Princess Sabra. That's a key indicator that he's drawing on Richard Johnson's version of the tale, The Seven Champions of Christendom, where George goes to Egypt in this version, kills the dragon, the princess falls in love with him, but the pharaoh, he's not having it because George is a Christian. So, and he wants the Moorish king to marry his daughter. So he has George sent off to Persia, where he's put in the darkest, deepest dungeon possible. And George, after many years, manages to break out, kills like 1,000 Persians on his way back, ends up in Egypt, takes Sabra with him. They marry and live in Coventry for many years. So in this version of the story, actually most of the action takes place after killing the dragon, and his love with Sabra is actually something which is condemned by condemned by her father. So it becomes an illicit love through that, and for Rossetti, that's going to be a key theme throughout his life. You know, the expression of illicit love, trying to love somebody that you shouldn't, and so on. So I think that's partly why he's chosen this rendition.
No, that's great. Thanks, Nathan, for that. That's brilliant additional context. I love this little moment here where she's kind of looped her hair around his helmet and she's just snipping it off. Just real intimacy, and again the bells players in the background here as well. You know, they're almost kind of like watching in, but they're trying not to look. Very intimate. I prefer the other one to this, but the hair snipping is pretty cool. Also, one of my best. This is another great dragon here from Rossetti here. Really nicely done. Okay, this is Ben Jones's part of that triptych for the dragon slaying. Okay, there's a couple of reasons why I don't like this. Number one, tiny dragon. Just like, if you get like, it just looks so stupid. I think this is like executing a dog or something like that. You know, it's like all the drama has been like, there's literally a lance on the ground. I can't believe this guy was literally lancing this small dog-sized dragon. It just seems like overkill to me. It's very much indebted, I think, to the Raphael one, which we saw for a second and then I deleted foolishly. I should have brought it back. But anyway, I don't like it so much compared to. But this is sort of like the build up to his Perseus stuff, anyway. Okay, this is another bit of kind of realism by Henry Poole. It's not that interesting. Let's keep on moving. This was quite good. John Dixon, Batten, a nice kind of like Burne Jones-esque roundel here. This is again very Burne Jones Ian in the figure on the left hand side here, but I think it's done as a tempera painting, so the colors are really cool, and I like the kind of the rudeness of the kind of barren countryside that's going on. That's pretty sweet. St George as a relief there, pretty cool, like that. You can't see it that well though. And then we've got the Watts one as well. Again, not the Watts one isn't my favorite, weirdly enough. Like, I like Watts when he's kind of like super trippy in the symbolist mode, But I mean, it was this is almost like, is this our first ginger St. George? This is ginger respect. I guess there's
St. George. We've got a ginger St. George. We are having true inclusivity in this stream.
Exactly. I told you this is a diverse stream. We approve of St. George diversity here. Okay, I don't really have anything to say on the What's One. I don't know if you want to talk about the What's One at all.
Let's just move on. We've got a lot to get through.
Okay. Just 3 more sections now. 3 more sections, guys. Okay, this one is, I've called it the Symbolist and New Sculpture group. What is symbolism? What is new sculpture? New sculpture is a specific group of English sculptors from around about 1890 going up to, I would say, even 1930, you could say, who can focus on part Renaissance, part academic excellence, and part Gothic elements. And then the symbolists, who are in fact, the symbolism is a group, is another inspiration of new sculpture, but symbolists are painters derived from the French schools, which starts in like 1850, which is like they're not really like a group properly. Anyway, so this is again a very, very loose grouping together. This piece here, we've got like a little St. George on the top here, so I'm going to delete that and move on and to Moreau's great St. George here. And this like Moreau is like the originator of the symbolist school. He painted this in 1889, but I mean, he really starts doing his symbolist work in the 50s and 60s. So this is a relatively late piece for him. It is the kind of classic rectangle style piece, 3/4 horse. There's something Renaissance-y about it for sure, again, but what makes it different is the mysterious landscape that he places things in. Like Moreau always takes us away to some kind of hazy dream as opposed to a fixed location, and the almost kind of oriental armor and kind of novel detailing on all of the figures. And again, you can see the kind of princess. She does, that's the proper Princess Sabra from Egypt for you there. This kind of true Byzantine queen sitting in the background. I'm a huge Moreau fan. He again, it's about colors as well. Definitely like looking to Tintoret or something like that, I would say. But difficult to pin down at the same time, but very nice piece. One interesting symbolist and St. George connection is through the Russian symbolist movement, because obviously St. George is related to like the flag of Muscovy, I think. And so that's why there's lots of Russian St. Georges. This is from Nestorov, his St. George, which I think eventually got part of a panel. The Russian symbolism is a little bit later. It's kind of like 1890, and it's kind of picked up a little bit from the French, a little bit from continental, kind of more graphic style painting, but with a smattering of Byzantine iconography at the same time. I mean, I love the color scheme here, and this is almost like an impressionistic painting of St. George. This is from Pont-Amard. I mean, is this really strictly symbolism? I mean, I put it in here as a symbolist because the guy is more academic, really, but this was kind of a bit more of the, in terms of the kind of color schemes. I immediately thought of someone like Knopf, but this kind of very beautiful St. George radiating sunlight and glory from behind himself as he lances this mystical serpent from another reality. This was kind of cool. You know what? I also forgot to include the you sent across a read on painting as well, Nathan. because again, he's sometimes grouped together with a symbolist as well. This one is by Maurice Dennis, who's another symbolist. Again, they do these kind of interesting pieces where, again, this is really like a post-impressionist landscape, really, something like Cézanne, even though it's 1890. And then the actual action is happening in the background here. St. George is fighting and the princess. There's elements of kind of fauvism as well, with these kind of new synthetic colors creating kind of bright landscapes. But look at the kind of attempts to create gradients are massively diminished. So this kind of clump of rocks becomes like two colors, although you do get some kind of quite nice shading in little areas. So this is all about St. George in color, less about the actual fight going on at the same time, but interesting recontextualization. Okay, going into some new sculpture. I mean, this is what I'm saying about this is a fundamentally, in my opinion, like a true combination of someone like Donatello in his true classical mode, but then you've got the kind of Gothic symbolism of these kind of the armor and kind of like otherworldliness to it. This is by Frampton. There we go. This was kind of interesting. This is by Solomon J. Solomon. May I say, maybe the greatest Jewish painter, I think, of all time. Dare I say, really interesting guy, kind of like academic, kind of symbolistic elements, because he also goes into the Edwardian period. And this is St. George sort of executing the dragon with what looks to me like a large katana, and then grabbing and just lifting off the princess on his arm at the same time. So again, I think this is some brilliant novelty in 1910. He's also sort of looking behind him. You know, cool guys never look at explosions or at acts of dragon killing at the same time. But like a really interesting design, I think, and it's got that kind of academic finish and excellence to it. But again, some interesting elements like his armor and the sword itself make it very very different. And the format again is very Knopf, I think, or Burne-Jones, that kind of long and thin. Definitely a hat tip to that. So, okay, we've got Venetsov, which is another Russian symbolist here. Again, there's something iconic about it. Venetsov. This is 1910. Venetsov was actually awarded the gold culture medal by Stalin. This is why I'm a big Stalin fan. Stalin, you can say what you like about Stalin. He had good taste in art. That's all I'm saying. Look at the attempt to do stonework here. You know, is it any surprise that like supremacism and kind of these kind of more abstract forms comes out of Russia at the time, or there's this kind of strong abstract element to it? You know, I think it's tied into the symbolist work of Venetsov. Really great draftsman as well. The horse is really beautifully rendered, but then he's kind of subduing it. He's doing it in the kind of Byzantine mode as well, or harking back to it. This is not a Byzantine icon, but he's still pulling from it as well. Big Venetsov fan. I think it's very, very beautiful, and an attempt to return to kind of earlier forms while keeping it in this kind of new landscape as well. Okay, we've got the classic Sovereign. This is sculpted by Bertram McKennell. He's a famous Australian new sculpture guy, but I think it's based on like a neoclassical original picture. But this is quite a famous for all you gold collectors out there. All you boomers with a whole lot of golden sovereigns in wealth probably have this picture, but it's done in 1914. Very nice. Did you know that the Liberty clock in the Liberty store has a St. George and the Dragons, which happens as part of the chime? There you go.
That is really cool. That is really cool.
It's I need to go there just to check it out. But I thought that was quite a fun little amuse-bouche here. This has got to be Bayes, is it? Yeah. This is Gilbert Bayes. Bayes sort of spans both the new sculpture and also like Art Deco, English Art Deco. Bayes is also the greatest horse sculptor of all time. He has like a horse sculpting phase of about 15 years and just drops banger after banger, just totally perfect horses here. This is like his St. George. I mean, the horse has got his one leg reared up, so again, that's kind of interesting, where he's kind of like the horse is reacting against it. There's something untriumphant about the horse. The horse is scared. He's not running into it with both feet up. He's like, oh, what is this horrible thing? And then you've got the lance bending down. I like, at first you think, oh, is the actual lance bent? But no, Bayes has actually got this moment of dynamism by saying, actually, look, the wood is going to bend when you stick it in the monster and you go forward. So you get that impression that St. George is moving forward at the same time. I would quite like this little St. George text on the bottom as well. I think that's quite cool. And the dragon's rather nice, but this is really like a horse sculpture, just with a St. George mask on top. We've got HC Fair here. It's quite nice piece, but I thought this one was way better. This is what I'm talking about in terms of some of the mystical symbolism. Okay, the pose is contrapposto. This is a Renaissance pose. This is Donatello, basically, but the armor is like, imagine you went on a mystical journey into the future, but the future is knights. That's what Fair here has done here. I also really love that he's gone for that. I think Solomon stole this motif from Fair here, because Fair operates a little bit earlier than him. The stealing of a maiden here, and I think she's obviously very beautifully done. And he's kind of nonchalantly, he's looking at the monster, and he got this great scimitar at the same time slaying the monster.
It's really like cool something from a Frank Frazetta comic strip, almost, or a graphic novel.
Well, I mean, that's where a lot of those guys will look to Fair and Gilbert as well for these kind of like. I mean, the problem is, to us now, it kind of looks quote unquote fantasy. That's what my wife says. This is a fantasy work. And it's like, well, no, this is before fantasy. This is like the inspiration for it. So I think it kind of gets diminished a little bit as high art, because it looks like comic books or something from the 70s. There is a cinema in London which has a large relief around it. You may have seen it. It's the Savile Theatre. It used to be a theatre. It's now an Odeon. Maybe Odeon's shut down, haven't they? So it's probably something else now. Showing my age. But wrapped around it is this beautiful low relief from Gilbert Bayes again, and it basically includes loads of English things from different kings and queens from the past all the way to the present. They think they've got Henry Irving at the end, but we've got St. George across here. And I particularly like that you've got the whole little St. George story here. St. George bowing down, the princess, the lovely horse, and of course the lizard. This is the most deco dragon we're going to get in the entire stream. So pretty cool. This one was kind of interesting. This is above the Birmingham Law Courts. It's a water house. It's a water house building done in like terracotta and faience. So it's this like beautiful red building, really over the top. It's kind of like Renaissance Revival meets Gothic. Now, this is above the doorway to the law courts, and there's a gigantic Queen Victoria. Just imagine Queen Victoria above it. But I really like the idea of St. George and the Dragon sitting above the law courts. This is about justice, is about evil slain. Imagine having a society which wants to slay evil, Nathan, and places like symbology like this above, the door to their law courts.
One can only hope for and imagine such a reality.
One day
it will return.
Okay, Stay with me, guys. Half an hour. That's all I'm asking for. We're going to do this. Can you cope for half an hour more, Nathan, or do you want to?
Oh yeah. I'm excited to see what the last two are. I'm very excited to see what these styles are.
We're about to hit modernism. I've just called it modernism because again, I've included. This is basically like 1910 to 1950. Surprisingly large amounts of stuff. Again, way more than neoclassicism, interestingly. There's a little bit in the Jugendstil and the secession movements. This is by Heinrich Leffler. Jugendstil is kind of like the German version of Art Nouveau, but it tends to be cooler. I don't really like Art Nouveau, but I really love Jugendstil. It's got that kind of Germanic sharpness to it, and that is quite influential, I think, to the Deco style as well. This is also very novel. St. George praying after his victory. I guess you sort of had it on that post-pre-Raphaelite one where George was sort of lying down next to the dragon, I think. But this is a very holy image across there I quite like. And also, again, in a building setting, which again makes me think he's referencing that Austrian work, the Austrian chiaroscuro work with the knight in that kind of building setting, which is quite cool. This was Fry did this. This is landscape with George and the Dragon. So Fry he's part of the Bloomsbury group. He basically brings post-impressionism to England, and unfortunately can be considered as the apex moment, bringing he's the root of abstract art, and all the kind of horrible stuff we love to hate today is actually Fry's fault, but he didn't really mean it and is actually quite a sound guy. Just to show that he's also a painter in his own right. He's a critic and a aesthetic philosopher. But this is his landscape with George and the Dragon, which is actually one of his better paintings. Like Fry's paintings are a little bit hit or miss. I think you either like Bloomsbury stuff or you don't. I like a lot of Vanessa Bell, really, and a few bits of Duncan Grant. But this Fry piece is quite nice. Again, who are they looking to? They're looking to the French. They're looking to Cézanne, Gauguin, late Monet. They're focusing on, Fry's big thing is rationalism. He cares about the sensory aspects of painting, about the design and the color over the thoughtful aspects. And there's no surprise there because he's put, again, St. George as this tiny little figure in the background and the princess here. But there's these two mysterious figures across here, so you do wonder what's going on here. It's called landscape with George and the Dragon, and it very much is landscape first with George and the Dragon second. But
the dragon, it's really hard to actually make the dragon out on that hill. He's like one with the hill there. Yeah,
exactly. I like the smoke and plumes coming from the village across there as well. That's quite cool. Okay, this is an Italian work, 1910. Again, you get a lot of this kind of graphic style pieces. The Italians didn't have Art Nouveau; they had Liberty, named after liberties. Imagine having an entire art movement in your country called Harrods or Debenhams. It's the Debenhams art movement. It just amuses me. But Liberty's interesting because it's they're really influenced by the arts and crafts movement, unsurprisingly, but also it's very graphic and very Art Nouveau as well. So it's a little bit of both. Hence, a Gothic motif done in this kind of graphic litho way. But I thought this is really cool, and I love the colors here, the reds and the greens, really banging. Okay, the classic. Britain needs you at once. This is the greatest bit of propaganda ever created.
Yeah, definitely.
When we inevitably go to war, Nathan, I'm just telling you, government Starmer, just call me up. Call me. I will deliver some of the top tier propaganda, and it will all look like this. It will be like a Dino just destroying a gigantic dragon or something like that. That's my propaganda. I mean, just as a graphic work, it's brilliant.
Mhm.
I love the titling. The setting itself looks like it could be a piece of like Renaissance marble, like a marble revetment. Britain needs you at once. There's such urgency to it. The actual St. George is a little bit goofy, if I'm honest with you. Like, again, considering all of the other artwork we see, it's not the best rendered, but it's done in a very graphic style. So again, just a couple of different colors, these kind of big blocks of color. It's about simplicity, and the dragon I really like as well, just as like almost an abstract modernist piece. This is almost like a This is almost a modernist piece. It's on the verge. Really cool.
What I wanted to say about this as well was just quickly is that, so this is the first kind of work of explicit propaganda of, okay, we're trying to get men to sign up for battle. But if you think of St. George as an exemplar from saints' lives, he's been an exemplar of patriotic Englishness and an allegory for the ascent of the soul. He's always been a figure that we're supposed to see as an ideal that we can aspire to. So in many ways, I could see why they would pick him and this scene for not only because it's dramatic and patriotic, but because unlike Arthur, who's well beyond most of us, George is something we can actually attain, as it were.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the attainability. Yeah, that's cool. This is kind of interesting. This is by William Macmillan, who is like a he's kind of part of the interwar medieval modernists. So again, they're kind of trying to they're typically sculptors trying to sculpt in a more simplified medieval style, not really romantic. This is his version of St. George, but it's post-war. So he's replaced the dragon with the Austrian eagle and the Prussian skull and crossbones. So I thought that was quite funny, as you wanted another propaganda piece. But again, he's kind of looking to archaic Greek forms sculpturally as well. So this looks like not a knight or a romanticized, classicized figure, but this could be on like a early Greek temple instead. This is interesting. This is Charles F. Fulks, and this is called St. George, 1914-1918. Obviously, First World War tied into the kind of first wave modernism, very important. This is St. George as your World War I Tommy. He's got this kind of halo. The aid post is this way, so you have the red cross above him, the red cross of the knight. We can't see the dragon, but we assume that it's in the distance. So again, there's this idea of is he about to go on his hero's journey? And you've got all of the kind of barbed wire, etc. Maybe the barbed wire and the landscape itself is the dragon. But I thought this is a really interesting attempt to recontextualize the St. George's story for the First World War.
I love the tiny white horse in the background as well, the toy horse.
Oh, I didn't see that. See, this is good. This is great. Good. Nathan's always got good eyes for that. But yeah, I might try and see this piece face to face because I bet it looks really good. Here's another one. Interestingly, again, we're talking about propaganda, and this one is called St. George and the Dragon, Zeppelin in the Thames. So again, it's a German Zeppelin downed, which is in the Thames, and again equating the Zeppelin as the monster, and you can see the flag here, the St. George's flag across there of the battleship across there. Again, I love stuff like this. Again, this is I just love human imagination to recontextualize the story and replace the dragon as a gigantic Zeppelin. Very cool. Okay, we're running out of time. This is another Gilbert Bays done as part of a Somerstown estate in the 1920. And can you believe it? In the first estates, they actually included high quality art as part of it. There's better quality art in this working class estate than there is in the high quality buildings of today. another baize, but we'll skip that. This was kind of interesting. This was a Charles Ricketts piece, and it was used for Bernard Shaw theatre production of St. Joan. So if you've ever, again, one of my favourite Shaw plays, St. Joan, light your fires, classic line. They're equating. So Ricketts is a famous. He's a Royal Academician artist, but also was very interested in stage design and set design. And so they included this version of St. George and the Dragon in the background. Is it any wonder that they've had St. George as this almost kind of feminine figure with long hair there, almost angelic figure as well, iconic, fighting the dragon. I mean, this is just a piece of like set, but I just love it as an art piece. The dragon itself is kind of like has been really stylized. This is almost, we've gone full circle back to that first Byzantine piece, I think, with this. But anyway, nice little shout out for Ricketts. This is by Alfred Frank Hardyman. He's another one of these medieval modernists I talked about. But again, this is not really medieval, but archaic Greek. This is like early Greek, but it's George and the Dragon, basically. So you have the kind of Greek nude, but it's not this kind of like Hellenistic or classical period, airy-fairy Greek, that what I like to say, that kind of style is, it is the masculine as feminine, basically. All your kind of like your posing boys, the archaic Greek, there is, again, almost Gothicness to it in its stability and strength. And that's what Hardyman's trying to take here. Maybe something of Perseus here as well. Perseus had the hooked sword as well, and the shield. So maybe there's an analogy there. And the Gorgon is the dragon, but it's definitely a dragon's head. And this is in Eltham Palace, I heard, which is a famous Deco National Heritage property. But I've been there twice and haven't seen this. So I need to go back a third time just to see this.
Just to see it, yeah.
Okay, this one was by Beryl Ellis, 1938. Again, don't really know much about her, but I thought this is a very lovely, kind of a bit deco-y, kind of a bit academic piece. Again, the kind of nude rider, again, similarly channeling some of that energy. Thought that's quite cool. But a couple of interesting pieces here. Did you know that there's a De Chirico St. George? And this is De Chirico in his like uncool phase. All the basically, but what I'm saying is you want to, okay, most De Chirico fans are like, oh yeah, De Chirico's early phase is his best phase. But if you're a real hipster like me, you say that his latter phase is his actual best phase. Say that to any kind of modern art guy, and they just literally will just like punch you in the face. De Chirico is important because he basically starts surrealism, right? Inspires all the French. He's Italian, but he basically does a whole lot of like famous like paintings which inspire like Dali and all those kind of all alike. But then decides to spend the rest of his life painting paintings a little bit like this, kind of strange, almost some would say kitsch pieces, which definitely kind of look back to the old masters, but are also very, very strange. This is actually one of his better pieces, and this is St. George. But this is with the emphasis on the princess here, but she's nude. So is it really a nude? De Chirico, obviously master of symbology here, doesn't really have that many symbols in the piece. It's fairly straightly done, I think. But I mean, I quite like the dragon here. But again, our first real emphasis on the princess here. And following on from another great surrealist master that kind of is also quite good, Dali does a sculpture and a couple of sketches as well, like his, again, relatively late, kind of quite loose sketches of, he's got a series, he does like a Don Quixote, which is quite famous in this style, if you've seen that before. Okay, we've got 12 minutes left. I've got one one section to go. We can do this.
Is it feasible? Is it feasible? Do you think?
I believe so. It's not. There's not that many. This is contemporary. I mean, I was quite surprised by how many modern pieces there were for St. George, really. And again, I think I think he does have eternal appeal and also international appeal at different times. I'm afraid to say this is the worst of the bunch. I've saved the worst for last. This is the real slop. This is Kerry Gerialis Richards. I mean, this is 48. And you can see obviously St. George across here, the dragon, and then the princess inside here. I mean, it's very, very loosely done. There's no dynamism in the main figure across here. I mean, I've tried to find. I mean, I always try and find something to like from a painting, even if you just know it's bad. Just try and find something to like about it. I'd say the colours are kind of interesting. Again, it's got like that St. George and Hell vibe that we saw beforehand. But I think, look at the horse's face. Even he knows this isn't a great painting.
He's giving you the eyes, just like, get me out of this painting, please.
Yeah, exactly. I found this kind of like a little amusing piece by an relatively unknown artist. This is 1950 George Zafiro. This is kind of like Cubist St. George. There we go. We're gonna have St. George in every genre here. I like at least with this one. I like the color scheme, and the shield's quite cool with the two-tone. He doesn't quite get the hands right here. You can see like one's holding. It's not holding the lance correctly, and the dragon has this kind of very strange kind of floating in air feeling to him. But I thought that was kind of cool. 1950. This is interesting. This is in Broughton Avenue in Richmond. I have not found out who the artist is, but this is 1960s. I'm pretty sure this will be. I bet it's related to some of those medieval modernists because it's very much like early Henry Moore or Eric Gill or something like that. So I wonder if it's one of their students. But again, I didn't hate this. Again, especially for relief work. Relief work, you're never going to be able to depict things in a realist manner because you don't have the space and you don't have the field of depth. So you have to make stuff more abstract. You have to design for the space. I particularly like the dragon at the bottom here. I think that's quite cool, kind of interesting piece. So that was interesting, and we got it done in a tile format. Christian Shepherd here. I mean, interestingly, in the 60s, there's a lot of illustration around St. George and the Dragon. It becomes like, I think a lot of mythology stuff in the 60s and 70s becomes kid stuff. It's like, because so much stuff was churned out in the Edwardian period as like books for kids, it then just gets, and then the kids read it and they don't associate it as like a grown-up motif. So, but I thought this is kind of interesting. I like that the horse has a bit of style to him and the colors are kind of interesting. 1961. Okay. I mean, this is a not great piece here. 1970, Harold Gosney. Okay, one of my pet peeves is like welders, like welding stuff together and like declaring it to be sculpture. This is definitely that kind of vibe where this guy is kind of like, we just welded bits together and like, oh, this is sculptural. It's just the worst kind of like lazy slop here. Like the horse doesn't work. The guy is huge compared to the horse. The dragon is like a duck-billed platypus. There's no style here. It's just all about like the novelty of the format. It's kind of like, yeah, what if I did St. George, but it was rubbish? You know, what if I did St. George, but it was welded together into pieces of trash? And the trash is where it should return, and one day will do, no doubt. This is more interesting. This is called St. George Silencing the Dragon. Again, definitely, I think this is Mark Goldsworthy. I didn't really look it up who he is, but I think it's derived from, again, the kind of the gill and 20s modernist set. I think it's done in wood, so you've got this kind of these heavy chisel marks, which I quite like. It's got that tangibility, and you can see the dragon's actually on top, and St. George shoving his sword into his mouth. So I like the savageness of it, and again the novelty. Also, again, know your medium again. When you're a wood carver, you've got to work with a tree, so that sort of sets you up for your shape of your piece. The shape of the piece is a long tube, so what can you really do? And I think he does quite a decent job coming up with a format for it. I have to say, hate the wings. They look like a big chicken wing, like a big, when you've plucked a chicken.
Yeah, I mean, it almost looks vampiric. This dragon.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that's a good shout. You're starting to see the decline in sculptural quality now as we hit the 70s. I mean, I found this, which is an 80s piece where I think St. George. This is like a wax piece. I mean, I don't really know. I was really trying to read about it. It was just nonsense, Nathan, if I'm honest with you. I think it's just a really ugly piece with a really horrible, ugly St. George on the top. The horse
almost looks like a hag. Like a hag.
Yeah, you're right. I think I wonder whether it's meant to be a woman as well, like St. George's woman, deeply subversive by Nicola Moss. The horse is quite good, like just from like a realist perspective. I think she's done the horse nicely, but I sort of hate this quite a lot. Okay, this is much cooler. I sort of previewed this. This is the Michael Sandal. Sandal is still alive today. He lives in the Isle of Man. I was watching Isle of Man TV the other day for an interview about him, and this was his first commission in '88. It's in Blackfriars, and this is his St. George and the Dragon. St. George is sitting on top here, and he's on this kind of cool futurist horse, sort of bent over, and then the dragon is like a big serpent which comes round. Like Sandal's figures, like I think he probably is actually one of the better living sculptors out there, and I would say like he doesn't have that many works, if I'm honest with you. So if you were to compare him to someone like Stoddart, for example, Stoddart has got an absolute ton of rubbish. Sandal doesn't have as much stuff. I mean, this piece definitely has its issues. I mean, I sort of hate the St. George's figure. His pose is really like goofy. He's sort of bent around like a boomerang or something. Very unnatural. I feel like he could have done a better job on that. But the horse is exquisite. I mean, that's a really beautiful and interesting horse. And same thing with the dragon. I mean, imagine having this as your first commission. But it was done in the 80s, so we'll never see anything as magnificent as that. People remember the 80s as this kind of like new golden age. It was the last time, like the last hurrah of Western civilization. Okay, here's a few more contemporary pieces here. Did you know that you could get a limousine ornament for your Bentley with a St. George and the Dragon? I mean, I feel like this is not a great piece of sculpture. The horse is okay, but the guy looks like he's a polo player. It's like a polo stick.
That's what I was thinking. It looks like polo.
But the polo ball is actually like a small lizard. I mean, other than the novelty of having a pretty sweet ornament on your car, which will definitely get nicked by someone, I did not like this piece.
I mean, the person who's going to be driven around in this may feel that elevated by the comparison of Polo and St. George. So maybe that's what it is.
You're probably right, yeah. Okay, here is the worst piece of St. George art of the entire show, in my opinion. Okay, because of that Bertram McKennell sovereign St. George, the Royal Mint has, I would say, heavily mined out St. George. I think they've done 10 different versions of the St. George coin, and they're all like they have quite an active team. However, this is just like an absolute monstrosity from 2005. The horse is just so bad. Then they've decided that actually St. George isn't riding the horse. He doesn't have legs. He's just like sort of sitting behind the horse. So, and then he's huge compared to it. But then they're like, oh yeah, how can we show the transition? I'm just going to shove the shield in between him in a really unnatural way, and then this kind of dragon. Oh, I just hate this. This is the worst piece. To be fair, I will say that the Royal Mint guys have actually been doing some okay stuff that I haven't hated recently. So I want to do a shout out to the guys down at the Mint. But this is an abomination, and we should melt down all coinage from 2005 to stop.
Eradicate it.
There we go, 2005. I was trying to look for other contemporary pieces. I found this guy again. He's around. I don't know much about him. His name is Clive Hicks, and this is his Green George. I thought it was kind of quite cool for a contemporary piece. Definitely harking back to some of those medieval style pieces.
Yeah.
The kind of messed up landscape here. Maybe something of the 20s with the kind of World War One helmet. And I like the colors as well. Kind of cool. I like, kind of interesting. I think you can probably buy this piece. I think the guy's still around these days. And we're going to round out with a minute to spare with my humble works, which I've thrown in as part of it. This was some stuff that I did for exhibition 1 in 2023. It's 7 relief panels. I'll tell a story about this quickly. I had the idea for a doorway, for a door filled with relief panels, having seen Frampton does this door in Two Temple Place, which is like these beautiful little panels. And I wanted to do something where it was all different versions of the George and the Dragon story. So this is kind of like 6 different versions of George and the Dragon. And then on the top, there is, the 6 are like George defeating the dragon. And then 1 is the dragon itself. And the idea would be that the 6 would be arranged around the door, and the big dragon here would sit on the top. And the idea is, as you're opening the door, the big dragon is actually looking down. As you're opening the door, you become the 7th George, as you're having to interact with the doorway itself. And it's to try and inspire people to live this kind of heroic life, to kind of see other St. Georges that have been throughout time. You know, St. George is not just a man; he is many men at different times of reality, and that's the idea behind the visions as well. It's kind of like, you know, throughout different times of history, and now is our time to be our own version of St. George. So these are all cast in bronze. These are all sold. Apart from, I still have the big dragon. Unsurprisingly, no one wants big dragon. So if you're interested, I'm on Twitter. Give me a shout, and I'm practically giving this guy away. He is exceptionally heavy, though. You can probably kill a man with big dragon guy. So there we go. That's my humble offerings on top. In terms of what, I'll give you my favorites. My favorites are this guy here, number 1. He came out magnificently. He again, definitely something symbolist, but I mean, I'm very interested in kind of Gothic art as well. And I really like this chap across here. I did him very manneristically. His kind of long, stretched out limbs being almost kind of surreal, and he's having this dance to the death with the dragon there. I might do another edition of this. I've still got the molds knocking around somewhere. That'd day.
Be fantastic. I mean, that leads me to maybe my just a final question, just something to kind of wrap us up, because you've done an amazing job. What then is the future for representing St. George in art? Because we've seen him go through several iterations, different styles, different techniques, different emphases. Where do you think he might go, and what would you like to see in the future for St. George?
I mean, I'm definitely going to have to do something around the woman holding the dragon. I think that's a really interesting idea, and maybe a bit of inversion where it's kind of like the woman as dragon versus St. George, some kind of modern telling of modern relationships between man and woman there. I think more emphasis on the princess. I think for sure. I think there's definitely more to be mined out from that moment. I think they could be done more with the story as a whole, as this kind of complete peace.
Mm.
And also, I think the Red Cross Knight stuff hasn't been
Yes.
wasn't that exploited, and I've definitely been inspired to read the story. The thing is, Fairy Queen is like absolute beast. It scares me. I have it in the shelf, and it's just like, oh, I should really read it, but I haven't.
I read it for in preparation for St. George's Day, and I was talking about it just very briefly because you could mine it for hours. You could do a whole day just on the Fairy Queen, right? And I think you'll love it. You'll love it because it's almost like Pilgrim's Progress mixed with like Dark Souls and just like what it draws out of St. George to me is just magnificent. But then also as a Christian, it's like, okay, I can actually learn from this text in following Christ. It's kind of delving into mysticism at one point, and you're just like, wow. So yeah, I'd recommend it, Ferro, because I think you'll be surprised what's in there. But I think visually, it's got so much waiting to be explored, so much in there.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, I think often some of those spin-offs get quite a lot of culture around them, and I think that is like it got a little bit of a hit, but not that much. And then I think the last thing I think would be interesting is just like we saw with some of that First World War pieces, just those two.
Yeah.
I thought it was such an interesting reimagining of the story and capturing a moment that I think there's definitely more to be mined. And I think there is something to be said about just depicting St. George again and again and again. Just repetition has a power of its own. Like we are in a novel age. We're obsessed with newness and everything, like individuality. And I'm like, I think there's something to be said for just doing the same thing over and over and over again in slight variation, especially when it's kind of like these key themes. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I think it's like as a Christian, sometimes you read the Bible and be like, oh yeah, that's the story I've heard like through like 100 times before in my life, 300 times. But then I'm like, yeah, but I'm gonna go up to 1,000 because it's such an important story, and it's both, there's both utility and you sort of enter into again, without sounding too wooey, almost meditative in through repetition. That's why people do chants, is to try and reach a higher kind of consciousness through repetition. And I think you can do that through art as well.
I suppose one just kind of final thing on that is George as a symbol, as an icon, he hasn't been subverted in the way that other characters have in our culture. And although there was a couple of images that you showed that maybe border on that, there was nothing egregious, right? There wasn't anything that was really undermining the whole spirit of the story. And I think that's quite an interesting thing. It's resilient because if they could, they would have, right? At this point. So I think that in itself is indicative. The best they can come up with is trying to deconstruct it, but actually as a story on its own terms, it holds its ground against the dragons of today. So that, I think, it's a powerful symbol that has withstood attack. So that in itself should draw us towards it as something to explore more fully, I think.
No, I think that's a really good a good point. I think it's interesting. Why has it not been subverted? I think partly because it's like a real deep core memory for so many people in Britain that like you couldn't even take it away, even if you could. You know what I'm saying? It just would. It's almost kind of like, say for example, if someone like did a gender bend on St. George and made him a her, for example, it just wouldn't compete. It wouldn't commute in our heads to have St. George as a woman. Do you know what I'm saying? In the same way that with some other, I'm trying to think of another example. I don't know, like history stuff, where they kind of change the background of various people. It sort of still computes in your head a little bit, but I think it just wouldn't make sense in your brain. So I think it has that kind of eternal power. Also, one last thing on this, like how
Mhm.
to see St George. I think it'd be great to see more on the design side. We saw a little bit in terms of like whatever that little silly button and stuff like that. I think
Mm.
there's just so much. This is one area that it's mainly been paintings and not much else, and I think could be something there as well. Anyway, sorry, you're wrapping up.
Well, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. I'm super appreciative of your time and effort, and just the amount of stuff you've gone through and the quality of it. It's been absolutely fantastic. So I'm really grateful to you, Ferro, for doing this. And I just want to ask, is there anything you want to promote?
You mentioned the Corncrake catalog,
Mhm.
have you?
Not yet. No, you can mention it first then. That was going to be my promotion.
Well, again, this is going to be another teaser. This is another teaser. Something big's happening from the Corncrake guys. I would describe it as maybe one of the significant art events of the year. If you're interested in culture, you've got to smash the subscription button right now to this channel and also to the Corncrake Twitter channel. And
Mhm.
I won't say anything more. I am featured in it ever so slightly, hence my hence me pushing it. But I think if you're interested in the arts, you're gonna love it, and it's a really interesting and unique thing that these guys have done that no one else has done. So keep an eye out for the catalog. I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to just leave it just tantalizing level of detail.
Well, just on that, Friday, 9 o'clock. Join us then, and all will be revealed at that point. So join
Exactly.
us then at 9 o'clock. Well, thank you so much, Farrow. Thank you to everybody in the chat. Take all of this away and remember that ultimately it's about becoming like St. George, embracing him in our culture, in ourselves, in our art. And I hope you go forth and think on that and embody that in the future. Thank you, everybody. God bless. Bye for now.